Morning, everyone. Before we start, I would like to request and let you all know of some hygiene rules. Request you to kindly close all applications for a seamless experience with us. Please use the chat feature of the Zoom to share your questions or any queries throughout the session. All participants, except for the panelists, will be placed in listen only mode. When sharing a question, please mention your name and your organization name with us. You may use the chat feature to share your point of view as well. Please use a steady internet connection like a broadband 4G dongle or something for a seamless experience. You may use wired wireless headphone speakers for an enhanced audio experience. In case you face issues with connectivity, you may use the Zoom app on your smartphone to join as well. All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to the third day of the second edition of India Gaming Summit 2021, hosted by the Financial Express Online and MPL. Before we start, I would like to thank our presenting partner, MPL, our co-presenting partners, WD Black, LG OLED, and Google Play. I would like to also thank EY, our knowledge partner, as well as our industry partner, AIGF, and our associate partner, Zupi. Lastly, I would like to thank our audience for joining us and request you to remain connected with us throughout the course of the day via social media led by the hashtag IGS2021. Without any further ado, let's begin the conference with the theme for the day being creating the right standard and regulation. We start off with our first session titled Real Skill Games, the need to create basic structure with multiple states banning real money gaming platforms on account of gambling. This session will highlight the need for a comprehensive regulatory framework applicable across India, which will have benefit both the users and the companies as well as assuage the government's need to protect its citizens. For this, please welcome our panelists, 𝗚𝗺𝗺𝗶𝗶, partner Ikigai Law, 𝗚𝗚vish𝗺𝗺𝗺𝗃, Advocate, Supreme Court, Subhi Chaturvedi, Chief Corporate Affairs and Policy Officer, Zubi, Niharika Karanchwala, Advocate, Karanchwala and Company, and Suhan Mukherjee, Partner, PLR Chambers. To moderate the session, please welcome 𝗚𝗺𝗺𝗃𝗺𝗃, Chief Policy Officer, 𝗚𝗃𝗺 Capital, India and Southeast Asia. If you have any questions for our panelists, please enter it in the chat box during the course of the session, and we'll ensure that the moderator relays it to the panelist. Over to you guys.
All right, thank you so much for that, and super excited to kick off this session. May I just request everyone to turn on their videos, and I think mine is going on as well. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to have such a fantastic panel to discuss this topic, which is really a hot button topic right now. And I think what's a real honor and privilege for me here today is that this panel consists of perhaps the best legal as well as policy experts on this subject matter. So thank you all for being with us. We clearly know that innovation most always precedes regulation. So you'll always have innovation and then regulatory structures being put in place to catch up with technology, to catch up with innovation. But sometimes the lack of regulation or perhaps confused policy making can also block innovation and put the future of an entire industry at stake. That's what seems to be the case somewhat with the booming online gaming industry that is reeling under the impact of regulatory uncertainty on one hand, but on the other hand is showing clear signs of maturity, clear signs of innovation, and clear signs of unprecedented growth. Given the government's overall commitment to the online gaming industry, there is now an urgent need to put in place a basic regulatory structure for real skill games and to ensure that this sector particularly has the blessings of this kind of a regulatory and policy environment under which it can flourish, and we do not see the kind of uncertainty that we're seeing right now. Over the next 1 hour, we're hoping to discuss what that ideal regulatory structure looks like, what are some of the conversations that are going on within policy circles, and what's the best way to move forward given that we have states as well as the center involved. Let me kick it off by first inviting Suhan Mukherjee to help us understand the classification and definition of this sector, because I think that forms the basis of moving to the next step of what that regulatory structure should look like. So, Han, we've seen tons of definitions. We've seen the sector undergoing classifications, some very, very credible reports recently coming out. Niti Aayog, specifically regulating fantasy sports. Share with us what's the overall view on how best to define and classify this industry. So, Han, you're on mute. If I could just request you to unmute.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So I think we've had a very, very important development just recently with the order coming out of the Madras High Court. And I would say the Chief Justice there, Mr. Justice Sanjeev Banerjee, has actually, I think, passed an order which basically typifies and how we need to move forward. Because for the first time, you've had somebody who has, in an order, historically set out what are the boundaries of this in this sector with regard to what the states can look at and with regard to what the center can look at, while putting down and laying down his interpretation of the jurisprudence. He has been very clear that skill games essentially is something that is to be regulated by the center, but that does not prevent states from coming and bringing in regulation that would necessarily look at protecting its citizens or creating some sort of order in the interplay of the gray area between those that are games predominantly of skill and those that are of chance. Because he said that in the domain of the states is gambling and gaming. I mean, interestingly, he's also laid down very clearly that the word gaming is synonymous with gambling. And it will be a negotiation, which I feel, or a gray area that where there is a bleeding edge of skill games into gambling that the sector will have to deal with. So you will have to have a conversation with the states. I think the center can have a very, very good role in perhaps defining what is a skill game or laying down standards for skill games. I think ideally, if you're looking at the online space, it should be under the IT Act so that you have a technical architecture which is uniform across and standards which apply across the country equally. But you may have to accommodate some things that states bring in. But it will be a lot of a political push. I mean, there will be a lot of work that industry needs to do to figure out this fine balance.
Right. So, Suhan, I would like to go deeper into some of the points that you raised about the center versus state debate. And I think that's what really defines the kind of concerns we're seeing with regard to the online gaming industry. Is it something that needs to be regulated by the center? Do we need central level guidelines? How much of a role will states continue to play given the whole gambling betting angle? We'll come to that in greater detail. But just in terms of a basic structure of a bright line test to determine games of skill and games of chance, I think it would be fantastic to have panelists jump in to say, have we resolved for that? Or is that something that will continue to create uncertainty? Avishkara, Prajita, 𝗚𝗺𝗺𝗃𝗃, Subi, any of you would like to talk about the whole distinction between the games of skill and games of chance?
Shweta, I'd like to comment here briefly. I think Suhan's laid out the jurisprudence and, of course, tipped the hat to the landmark and historic judgment of the Madras High Court. The Honorable High Court has used very candid and clear language to not just define the role of the state, but also how law needs to sit on this. As far as the aspect of does the government need to come in and who do we need to define, there have been companies who've approached the court. There have been citizens who've approached the court. And in India, we realize very clearly that games of mere skill, and we don't mean preponderance of chance, that is where the jurisprudence really sits. Who decides that? It's amazing that we've got a knowledge partner and an industry partner in AIGF. They do have a self-regulatory body, and this is where honorable justices of the High Court, Supreme Court, psychologists, sports players, everybody's been on that committee. to not just test games of skill, but also to go through them in their bare bone structures and then determine whether they deserve certification of being a game of skill. So we've seen in the case of media and editorial guidelines, especially in the case of internet, Shweta, the industry survives because of permissionless innovation and the understanding, as you rightly mentioned, that innovation will always be 4 steps ahead of regulation. When you look at the kind of players who are involved, they're former IITians, there are startups, and who rise to the occasion because they're nimble-footed. So we have to understand there are 2 things that were said, and it's very important that we address them. That the Public Gambling Act, which is where a lot of states draw their power from, many times we end up seeing gambling and gaming being used interchangeably, and that is part of the problem. There are 5 different kinds of gaming segments as we understand today. There is no blanket Indian consumer or Indian gamer. There are 400 million Indian gamers, and to say that everybody's playing only for stakes. Similarly, there are different gaming segments, so you can't have a one size fits all approach, and our approach has been more stick than carrot. So if we look at the NIST standards, if we look at standards or tests of a good regulation, one, it needs to balance user interest, and second, it also needs to make sure that there's orderly growth of the industry. You can't kill what you've been set out to fix. So what we need is minimum government, light touch regulation, and that's similar to any industry that has run on the internet as a platform. So just to say that, is it really the determination to be made by the government, who may or may not understand all the finer nuances, or the industry itself is doing a sufficiently decent job of creating self-regulatory bodies where players who are legitimate business model run operated players are adhering to these conducts?
Right.
I can't stress enough on what Suhan said earlier on the bit that industry needs to do far more in terms of building bridges, in terms of changing perceptions, and actually being out there to tell people that this is really a responsible, ethical gaming industry where players have standards, where there are checks and balances in place. So while respecting the fact that government has legitimate concerns, we have to understand that, is it regulation, is it permissionless innovation, or what kind of a regulatory framework are we looking at? Right?
Sure.
I'll stop here. I'll come back more to revisit this point.
So, but very, very important points. And I think one of the basic things that Subi has raised, which we intend to, I think, discuss in detail, is the whole idea of self-regulation. Is that something we should pursue? Is that something that should really define the regulatory architecture of an industry like this, where there are so many conflicting ideas, and perhaps the industry knows best because they are the ones that are able to understand and have that fine understanding of different categories, as Subi was pointing out. But very quickly, comments again on the classification. So we also touched upon the fact that there are different kinds of games. So while we do a broad-based classification of skill versus chance, perhaps are we putting ourselves into a bind the minute we're saying that this is the only way we classify the industry? Are we supposed to look at it in different ways? Are we talking about esports, fantasy sports, card games? So any other thoughts around the definition as well as the classification before we move on to the ideal regulatory environment for the industry? I think, Niharika, you'd like to comment on that. Yeah.
Hi, Shweta. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Subir that defining it only as game of chance versus game of skill and restricting yourself to a regulation only in terms of control or prevention of gambling is taking a very, very narrow view of what is essentially a multi-billion-dollar industry. She's absolutely right, because regulation is required in all aspects of the gaming industry, whether it is self-regulation by the industry or whether the government has to step in at some point. I do want to discuss the question of regulation from the perspective of player safety. If you would like me to come to that a little later, I can.
Yes,
but I
Niharika, we'll see
that is what needs to be
towards the second half, because we want
Absolutely.
to. Yeah, but that is a very important aspect, and we will come to that, because unless you don't address the elephant in the room, we're not being able to solve for what the government is concerned about. But we'll come to that in a bit. But first,
Shweta, could I come in on this point that you are? So I actually prefer a more conservative approach, just looking at the jurisprudence that has been in this country even pre-independence 1950s onwards of classifying things as games of chance and skill, because you have stability. The moment you try and start creating more categories, and let's understand that this is a sector which is considered a sin sector presently. So we have to take in the socio-political economic context when we are framing regulation in this. I feel if
Sohan,
we,
just hold your thought and let me get every panelist exactly to
yeah,
the point that Sohan is saying. Sohan's view here is that classifying industry in a clean skill versus chance is the right way forward. A quick, response from every panelist there, and you can obviously elaborate on why you agree or disagree. Avishkar, yeah.
So I think, yeah, absolutely right. It should only be slotted in two different silos, which is skill or chance, because I think the moment you try to create too many categories, you'll have to create separate regulations. But on a deeper introspection, the state's interference with these games of skill is absolutely unwarranted. So we must realize, firstly, banning is a complete no-go. You cannot have banning of such games. That's illegal as per the judgments of the Supreme Court, right from the Constitution bench of 𝗚𝗺𝗶𝗁 to 𝗤𝑇yanarayanan, to Lakshmanan, etc., etc. But the state taking away the exemption that the acts had provided for 40 years. These are gaming acts which are in Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, different places. They took the ordinance route. They took away the exemption that was specifically given to games of skill. I think that was something which the central government in the union should come out with the central government should think about coming out with a uniform law regarding, and interference, and first of all legislative competence. Of course, legislative competence of the states is only as far as betting and gambling is concerned. So when a judgment of the Supreme Court says rummy is a game of skill, do you need to go further than that? I mean, I don't see how the states could have done something like this. There are concerns. There are obviously concerns as regards cheating, as regards manipulation, as regards siphoning of funds, as regards collusion. The cards might not be generated. Okay, loss of livelihoods. There's a public interest angle to this. Those are concerns which can be addressed by proper regulation. But that regulation, whether it is self-regulation or by a legislative interference, that has to be decided. The other issue that needs to be looked at is that what is this bright line test? How do you define? Is it on the basis of certificates, or is it on the basis of, as you rightly pointed out, well-known people in the gaming industry giving certificates that, okay, this is a game of skill, and if it is played in this manner, only then it will be a game of skill. So how do you come out and espouse that bright line test? That's the other issue. And the other aspect of this is that, of course, the union government needs to take a strong stand as far as protecting. Like recently, Justice Nariman, there's an appeal from Rajasthan High Court in that Dream11 case, where he dismissed that appeal. He said this issue is no longer res integra. All games of skill are protected by the Constitution of India. You can't interfere like this. So there is a big push now to protecting games of skill under, of course, Article 19. And we need to take cue from that, and we need to understand. Now, of course, I think there is a great deal of legitimacy given to Dream11, which is fantasy sports in our country. So if that is so, then why should you not extend the same courtesy to other games of skill like rummy, poker maybe? I mean, there may be some issues regarding it, chess, of course, etc., etc.
Right. So I think Avishkar's raised some very, very important opening thoughts around it. Aprajita, would love for you to come in here. Are we seeing that at least within the industry there is consensus around what defines games of skill? Because before we can even approach regulators and policymakers and say, what, as Avishkar was rightly pointing out, that this is a very well defined category. There can be self-regulatory mechanisms, as Subi was saying, where industry-led certifications can happen. But do we have consensus within the industry to go ahead with this bright line test?
Yeah. So long and short of it is that there isn't consensus, whether it's amongst high courts in various different state governments or within the industry, on what is that bright line test of when a game trips the threshold of being chance-based, when it meets the dominant factor test of whether it is more than, say, 51% based on chance or more than 51% based on skill. And I think that becomes very important, right? Because if you have different high courts of different state governments subjectively looking at the bright line test, applying it differently to different games. You have this sort of bizarre scenario in which the same game could be unlawful in one state because it doesn't meet the skill-based requirement of say 51%, but it becomes lawful in other states. Now, for online gaming platforms, they are launched obviously pan-India. Anyone in any state can access them. You have to start geo-fencing them in states which say, look, this game doesn't meet the threshold of what a dominant factor test, the skill-based test, or the bright line test is. So I think it's very, very important at a very first principle basis to have objective mathematical criteria that say that this is how we judge whether a particular game meets the dominant factor test or not. And that can't be left to sort of the subjective interpretation of every sort of state government and every state high court. There has to be a uniform method of determining whether a game meets these thresholds. Now, statistical and mathematical criteria could be, sort of objective criteria on, for instance, if you played the game in a randomized manner versus a user with hand-eye coordination, prior knowledge, all of the factors of skill, competitiveness, rules of gameplay. If you saw all of those factors introduced into the gameplay, would it have a completely different output than, say, a randomized output? So if there is an industry association or a self-regulatory organization which is empowered, and I think that's very important, which is not just voluntary membership, which is empowered with having a technical standard in place, which says that these are the minimum criteria that you need to meet, which are based on statistical models, mathematical models, with a certain amount of, objective criteria that every game needs to meet that bright line test. Only then you will have uniform regulation of games. Otherwise, you sort of have this kind of situation in which gaming platforms are always under the threat of being of failing the dominant factors test in various different states.
And that, I think, Prajita, is a very, very important point. And I'd love to get those who are supporting, the classification of skill and chance to come in on that point that Prajita has raised, which is that while it seems to be so far the most practical, the most, and the most sensible way of going forward, and we've seen that this is something that we've had judicial pronouncements. Are there alternatives in approaching this? Reason being, are we not subjecting the industry to more uncertainty as we move forward? Because you're constantly under the overhang of whether you classify as a game of skill or chance and whether you're going to go ahead and get that certification or not. So while we agree that this may be the best way forward, are there alternates, and what are the cons or the downsides of this approach? Very quickly before we wrap up this.
Shweta, can I just comment? This is a very important point, because as an industry player, it's very important to hear from the industry on how we really approach this. It doesn't automatically happen that today you made a game and you went and put it up on the Play Store. One, there are several entry barriers. There are checks and balances, both by way of Play Store. Second, it's very important for our viewers and our readers to understand what is the process that a gaming company undertakes before it even goes live. So for putting out a single game, we have upwards of 8 to 9 legal opinions from prominent lawyers who will not write something that they can't responsibly stand by. Before we even get to that stage, we put out over 10,000, 20,000 randomized tests, as Aprajita was rightly pointing to, very elaborate statistical models where not only are we testing a highly skilled bot versus a random user. When you talk about the bright line test, it's very important to understand. If you study a lot of judgments, you will realize very clearly two factors play a very, very important role. If you try to lose this game on purpose, can you? That determines whether it's a game of chance, whether it's a game of skill. And second, over time, do you see yourself improving? And does that have a bearing on the outcome? When we look at players of different skill sets, whether it's someone who just decided to play. So supposing you tried playing a game with a 3-year-old, not that you can because age gating measures are in place, but if you tried doing it, does the 3-year-old have an equal chance of beating you? No. So that is where we need to understand that the industry has already come a long way. To start with the premise that they're inherently bad actors who are out to manipulate, that's not really the case. It's an industry which is, I just need about 10 seconds more. It's important to put this into context. We're today looking at a $1.8 billion opportunity. It is expected to reach $3.9 billion by 2025. It's the only sector across media, entertainment, any other verticals, which has shown a 43% CAGR growth, year on year compounded annual growth rate. When we talk about using gambling and gaming interchangeably, that is what is problematic. So if you look at Index today, it's amongst the top 5 countries across the world in gaming. 7.3 billion times games have been downloaded, and we own 17% of the global market share. When you're looking at job creation, Shweta, you're looking at adding 2 lakh new jobs in the next 2 years. We have to deal with it very seriously and not saying that, oh, we're out to do inherent mischief, and therefore let's first put a tight structure in place and then we'll deal with the legitimate business concerns. So we'll address all the concerns that Avishkar very rightly laid out, and the industry is already working with the government, whether it's centers of excellence, whether it's responsible ethical gaming, whether it's player nudges, whether it's making sure that you can't play beyond a certain time, whether it's ensuring that if you've lost a certain amount of money, your profile gets locked out, and we're doing geofencing. But the
in fact, maybe if you could hold your thought on that, because some of these measures that you're talking about, we want to discuss in detail as self-regulatory codes that are already being put in place. So whether we need heavy-handed regulation at all, or is the industry taking care of, and exactly the point that even 𝗚𝗺𝗺 was raising, which we said we're going to discuss in detail around how the industry is dealing with some of these so-called concerns as well as policy worries that the government has. But very quickly now, moving on to the whole state versus center argument. I think that remains the heart of the regulatory debate as far as the sector is concerned. Maybe I'll request 𝗚𝗺𝗺 to come in next on this one, because 𝗚𝗚𝗺𝗺, I think we've had a lot of conversations now around, as Subi's pointing out, the fact that you consider online gaming akin to gambling in itself is a wrong starter. You've just started off on a wrong foot, which is why this has led to excessive regulation on part of states. What we're seeing right now is a complete mess, because on one hand, you've got liberal states, you've got states that have gone ahead and completely banned, which Avishkar has rightly been saying, that do the states even have the constitutional right to go ahead and ban an entire sector? And to the other states who are saying, what, we will figure this out, but educate us a bit more. So we do have an entire spectrum that we're dealing with. But 𝗚𝗺𝗺𝗁, the basic question: should it be regulated by states, or do we need central level guidelines or central level regulations, as well as, someone in the center adopting this industry? The numbers that Subi was telling us, someone's got to wake up and say, you know what, this is a great cash cow for the government. This is India's future.
So thanks for asking that, Shweta. Obviously, the best case scenario would be self-regulation within the industry. And if that is something that can meet the legal requirements for a sector of this magnitude, then that would be ideal. That being said, it's not necessarily something that they would be able to achieve. I feel that if there is a central type of regulation put in that governs across states, that would be the next best situation. Because like you said, when circumstances are so different across states, it just leads to an exceedingly complicated situation. And right now we're talking about the limited issue of gambling versus games of skill. And I also want to address what Avishkar and Suhan itself said earlier, because I understand the inclination to want to restrict right now to games of chance versus games of skill, because otherwise, like I said, you see the massiveness of this industry. But if we do that, I'm afraid that we'll only be, as you said earlier, playing catch up with other aspects of this industry, right? And there are so many gamers who are not in it for stakes, as Subi said, who are not just playing games that can be called games of chance. There's a huge section of very casual gamers who are playing things like mobile applications, console games, a variety of things, massive multiplayer online role-playing games, a variety of things. And all of those also have significant real-world concerns. And I just wanted to give a few examples of those. The first amongst which, of course, And the easiest example that comes to mind with regards to player safety, especially with in developments over recent years, is the question of cyberbullying, of course, right? That is the first thing we can see. But it goes much deeper than that, because you have a situation where the real world consequences of certain video games also wind up in considerable injury. Like, for example, there's one game that came out a few years ago. I think everyone knows I'm gunning for Pokemon Go here. That involved, it was a movement based game, and you walked around and you looked for these Pokemon to collect. And you did. And it was an incredibly popular game, a stunning amount of revenue, resulted in a phenomenal amount of injury, because people were walking into dangerous places to try to play these games. People were trespassing, which is another law broken and another person's rights violated. And just in 2017, when this game was at its peak of popularity, and this is an old stat, mind you, so numbers will have grown, Pokemon Go was responsible for over 150,000 car accidents with over 256 fatalities. Now, those are massive real world consequences that we can also equate to the kind of consequences that gambling would bring about, which is why it's important to regulate these sections as well. And you see, other jurisdictions have been able to bring about some measures for player safety. Like, just a small example, playing off Pokemon Go, we would be um, I've tried playing Pokemon Go in a car. I wasn't driving, of course. But once you reach over a particular level of speed, the game sends you a notification saying, if you're driving, don't play this game. And you can just say, okay, I'm not driving, and let it be. Now, I think considering the stats on injury involved, games have to take into account, and the industry has to take into account, is it enough to just send a gamer a note saying, hey, don't play while you're driving? Are your players mature enough to take that note and run with it? Or should you just reach a situation where you decide, okay, you know what? If the game senses that you're going above a certain speed, it locks down and it's not going to allow you to play. It's a walking based game, it's a movement based game. Don't play it in a car, irrespective of where in the car you are. Right? So, those are some things that definitely need to be addressed, and it would be best to address them sooner rather than later. There are also some other examples of real world crime that I'd love to get into, but I see that Sohan has his hand up. I'm going to give someone else a chance to speak first.
Thanks. Shweta, should I come in?
Yes, please, Sohan. I know.
Yeah,
want to
so,
there, and
yeah,
also
so,
we could touch upon the center versus state aspect.
yeah. So I think what we need to be very clear about is that the regulators essentially going to step in when there is money coming into the system and there's a question of money. I don't think we need to be concerned too much about the other types of games. I mean, and we shouldn't confuse formats of games and types of games with the basic genus of definitions of what is a game of skill and what is a game of chance. I think it's very important that the industry first aligns and comes together on figuring out what is real money gaming, because there is the market is fractured around that. My personal belief is any game in which there is a economic transaction should be classified in the real money gaming piece, because whether I'm buying a gun or an attribute, uh, that's somewhere where the state will look at. Thereafter, and a classic example of this confusion of formats as versus what is a game of chance and a game of skill is the issue around Dream 11, for example. Dream 11 is one format of a fantasy game. It is not fantasy game per se. Or, for example, with the recent order of the Madras High Court, the recognition of poker is not all forms of poker. If you get, and for some of us who all were involved in that case, I mean, 𝗚𝗺𝗺𝗶𝗁 was there as well, is that we were very, very conscious of the fact that what the court has recognized is the Texas Hold'em method, because that's the reference to the judgment from the US Supreme Court, as well as what was referred by the Law Commission. So when we are looking at the center and the state issue, I feel the center is not going to step in beyond a point in trying to interfere in this, because let's understand what happens in the gaming space is also going to affect offline formats where the states are necessarily the master of all that they survey. I think we have to be conscious as industry as to what we want to ask each of these two sets of governments. I think at the center, we should be asking for technical standards to be laid down that reflect safety, transparency, and standards which ensure that there is no bot certification, there is random number generation certification, and things like that that come under the IT Act, which you can bring out as rules and frame things like that. Rules around payments, the KYC. For example, today industry doesn't necessarily do KYC at the time of deposit across the board as an industry. They do it at the time of withdrawal. I think from a safety perspective, and again, looking at what was happening in the case in Tamil Nadu or what government say, we need to raise the bar on that.
So Sohan, just to sum up what you're saying, number one, you're saying that the basic classification of game of skill and chance, number one, you said should not be confused with the categories of games, whether it's fantasy, esport, casual.
Yes.
Yes. So one, we need to understand that skill and chance will continue because that is a legal requirement.
Yes.
Which is important. And two, if you could be very specific on what your view on the center versus state is, what you're saying is certain aspects of gaming should be determined at a center level, but it should continue to be a state level decision making. And could you elaborate why you believe that is the right approach?
So the law is very clear that games of skill that falls within the domain of the center. But let's understand where the harassment will, on a day-to-day basis of operations of companies are going to be affected. It's going to be when states necessarily take action under what they are empowered to do, which is the subject matter of gambling. And let's also be very clear that gaming has been equated to gambling in our jurisprudence from a terminology perspective. So we should also decide, I know Subhi's shaking her head on that, but the judgment that's come out from the Tamil Nadu High Court sets it down very clearly, and the two judges have done a fantastic analysis. So we shouldn't need to deal with the semantics, but the center could come out with standards of safety and what could be a game of skill. I think there should be deeming provisions. So, for example, all games in which a court has held it to be a game of skill should automatically be deemed a game of skill and falling out of the purview.
I'm still trying to understand your argument for supporting Subhi. I'll just come to you in a moment because I know Avishkar also wants to make a point, and I'll go to Avishkar next. But Sohan, your argument for supporting the fact that states should continue to regulate is, I think, from what I understood, what you're saying is that there is no going away from it because states will have that, will continue to exercise their legal right, will not give it up. I'll also want you to...
Nothing will prevent a state police police from anywhere walking into a place and saying, you are actually gambling here and all of your directors, etc., have to come to the police station and explain what you're doing, and there will be FIRs, etc., etc. So if you don't engage with the state governments to create clarity, SOPs, methods by which they can understand whether an offense is occurring or not occurring, that harassment will continue and that will create a friction in the industry.
Very well. And I think we'll talk about the revenue and the taxation and the GST aspect and all of that also in just a bit. That will be, again, some of the last points. And I think we'll have Aprajita also elaborate on that. Avishkar, very quickly, your thoughts on what Sohan said on state.
I think my quick thoughts are, firstly, that on the legal aspect of this whole thing, there is a list to entry 34 of our constitution, which gives the right to state governments to legislate on betting and gambling. That is the exclusive, and that is the jurisdictional question, which is a sine qua non, as we say, is a precondition to exercise that jurisdiction, is only when a sport is gambling. Only then can they legislate on that issue. Now, as Sohan rightly said, that state governments have all the right to enter a room and determine whether you're gambling or playing a game of skill. That will not come within the domain of the central government. But the central government can always lay down guidelines to say that, okay, this is what a game of skill is, and this is what a game of chance is, and please don't harass people who are playing legitimate games of skill. I have no doubt in my mind that all these ordinances will be set aside because they are without sanction of the law. They are illegal. They are against the Supreme Court decisions. They are manifestly arbitrary. And with the able assistance of my esteemed colleague, Mr. Mukherjee, and everyone else in different courts, I think we will all land up in the Supreme Court very soon. And the Supreme Court, either by a committee or by retired judges like Justice Nariman and Justice 𝗚𝗺𝗺𝗺, who have dealt with this issue from very close quarters, will be able to set down those guidelines of how you determine that bright line test that we're so much talking about, and that can be then converted into a legislation. That's my view of doing it, because then you have stakeholders participating in what the regulation should look like. That's number one. The other thing is that the states, when they continue to, under their gaming acts, because Tamil Nadu has a gaming act, Andhra has a gaming act, West Bengal has a gaming act, when they continue to regulate gaming in their areas, they also regulate games like Flash. They regulate games which have, a great deal of cash being used, money laundering issues, all of that. So state has to be given the discretion and the freedom to interfere where they find any hanky-panky is going on. But that goes without saying that you must give full protection to games of skill, because that is our constitution.
Just to summarize, and if I understood
one last point,
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, just one last point. I don't know if you've noticed the 𝗚𝗺𝗺𝗺 judgment, which talks about a betting house, a gaming house. When there is a gaming house which is making profit from such activities like this, that is when a problem occurs, because that's when they say that, okay, you're not merely playing a game of skill for wager, you are also making profit out of that activity. That profit is an area which was a gray area, which in a later judgment was not opined upon by the Supreme Court, unfortunately. And that 𝗚𝗺𝗺𝗺 view is what has led to these ordinances by the different states. That is the judgment which has created all that confusion in one paragraph only. And that is what I feel is now leading up to all this ambiguity, etc., as regards whether they are allowed to do it or not.
Avishka, state or center, what is the final take, or a hybrid model of?
I think the guidelines must be prescribed by the central government. The enforcement of those guidelines must be left to the state governments to protect games of skill and to kick out all the gambling activity.
Okay.
And to ban
central level guidelines is what you support. I know Niharika has been wanting to raise to make a point. So is Subi. Niharika, you first. Do you agree with this approach of central level guidelines followed by states finally implementing it and coming out with their versions of it?
Shweta, I am a fan of whatever works. And the fact is, if that is a system that can adequately be implemented at both the center and the state level, that would be great. Like I said, of course, most preferable to my mind would be some self-regulation within the industry. One more thing I wanted to bring up, which Sohan discussed, was the question of actual money being used in these. And now I agree with him that a lot of the other games that I mentioned, it's a sub-classification perhaps of a game of skill, but I just wanted to re-emphasize again the importance of bringing regulation to those aspects of it too, and sooner rather than later. Now, in certain games in certain online games, if you look at MMOs or massive multiplayer online games, you have situations where a lot of real world currency is pumped in to purchasing virtual currency, and then that goes into virtual assets and things like that. You also have a growing sector of crime, which is technically classified as virtual crime, but then shifts to real world crime as well. For example, in South Korea, you have the formation of a lot of mafias or gangs that offer protection to players in return for real world currency. Otherwise, they will move forward, attack those players, steal their virtual assets, and those virtual assets also again find real world currency and real world value, because you have several instances of virtual assets being sold in online games, being stolen in online games and then being sold on eBay for huge amounts of money. This is also something that requires a lot of dealing with. You also have situations where, when it comes to the protection of minors, certain governments have taken a lot of steps to protect them. And that goes beyond just ensuring that a minor is not gambling or doing things that could be destructive to them. Like, for example, a restriction. I think Subi mentioned that earlier, on the amount of time things can be played. Again, in South Korea, where the gaming industry is very large, there's something known as the shutdown law or the Cinderella law, which means for all players under the age of 16, because you have to enter a resident code, which is like social security number when you play online. You can't play any online games between the times of midnight to 6 a.m. All of these are brought into account to protect players in these situations and to ensure their well-being. If we don't also look towards moving to some sort of protections like that, we are essentially inhibiting the growth of what is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Because when you have massive real-world consequences, you have knee-jerk reactions from governments, which is let's ban the entire.
Niharika has hit the nail on the head that to expect that we will not see heavy-handed regulation simply because there is enough conversation around self-regulation is perhaps being a bit wishful. We have to have very strong self-regulatory codes in place, but at the same time, if we do not understand that these codes are stringent enough to protect and to take into account concerns of governments and policymakers, you take one incident and then you're going to come up with a kind of regulation that will benefit nobody. And I think that's the point that we need to be very well aware of, because this is an industry that's booming and growing. And I think we need to put in place those codes rather quickly. Prajakta, very quickly on the point of state versus center, but I also want to incorporate, two questions that have come up from the audience, because while we're still on that topic and we move on to the
I'd like to comment on this point as well.
Yeah, Subi, I will just come to you in a moment. Prajakta first, center versus state, Subi, and then you on center versus state.
Sure. Shweta, I think on center versus state, it is important to sort of speak out first principles, right? Do we need state governments regulating gaming? Most state governments conflate gaming and gambling and are empowered only to regulate gambling, games of chance, which are played for money. Games of skill, on the other hand, should be completely left out of state government statutes, and there should be a specific exemption, right? So that there is no ambiguity where a state government can say even games of skill that are played for real money will be regulated by the state government and can be licensed, can be prohibited, can be banned. Which are, there are certain state governments which have gone ahead and done that, right? They've banned real money games for skill, or they've licensed real money games for skill. To prevent that kind of a bizarre outcome where you have a few states which come under that prohibited state or licensed state classification, you do need state governments to have a specific exemption under their state legislation which says our statute doesn't cover games of skill. We're empowered only to govern gambling and betting activities. The center will then need to come in. Either the union list will need to have a separate entry which empowers the central government to legislate games of skill, or you need to go under the broadcasting entry which says that any kind of gaming activity, not gambling, but any kind of gaming activity which is skill based comes under the union list, for which empowers the state to regulate broadcasting activities. Now, in terms of actually that, sort of practically speaking, okay, now you've had state governments which say we'll come away from regulating games of skill for money, but that actual determination becomes very important, right? Because then how do you have that kind of demarcation where the center's authority begins and the state authorities stop? To do that effectively, the central government does need to empower a technical committee, not a voluntary committee where the membership is simply voluntary, but a technical committee which lays down the technical statistical standards of what amounts to a game of skill and where the dominant factor is chance and therefore amounts to gambling or betting, etc. Without that, there'll always be a tussle between center and state, where state will say, can have some bizarre interpretations to say, even though many other states in the country hold this to be a game of skill, I, as a state government, have the power to say that it is I have the power to regulate gambling. I consider this game to be dominantly based on chance. Therefore, I will regulate it. So without a centrally sort of appointed technical committee which says that this is the objective technical standards based on which we determine skill and chance-based games, preponderance of skill or dominance of skill, you'll always kind of have that ambiguity and struggle. Right. And, you do need a sort of central law which says that this is the way we regulate gaming, which is skill-based and played for money.
Right, right. So I think, Prajita, you're very clear in your thought on getting that exemption for at least games of skill from states. So I think that's the
Shweta, the exemption already exists. The
yes,
exception to games of skill is already there in statutes. The question is, states don't necessarily respect that, and unfortunately, even if you have that going forward, we will have to keep fighting, and keeping states reined in based on what the law says.
Yeah. So
just to
that was lasting for about 20-30 years was actually repealed by way of ordinances. That exemption in every act of the state was repealed by way of ordinances, and those are the ordinances that are in challenge in Andhra and Telangana, where I happen to be appearing, and in Tamil Nadu, where Mr. Mukherjee is appearing. So that was the exemption which is in challenge today. But that exemption is saying that games of skill shall not be treated as games of chance and shall not be prosecuted under the Gaming Act. That exemption already exists, just for clarification.
So agreed, the exemption already exists, but it is important because many state governments will still interpret, right? Will still pass orders, will still conflate gaming and gambling. And the constitution doesn't really empower them to regulate gaming. It empowers them to regulate gambling.
So 66A, where they continue to register FIRs despite the section being taken off the statute book.
So Avishkar, my point is to give an entrepreneur the comfort that I won't have the police knocking on my door and saying that you're conducting gambling activity. It is important to have that kind of regulatory certainty at state level where states back off from gaming activity and specifically create that kind of exemption. And there isn't that exemption is there, but it needs to be more specifically put out by state governments as an intention to say, we will back off from games of skill. That is not our prerogative. And then to strengthen that, you do need to have a central law which says that, look, this is the bright line between games of skill and games of chance, and that can only be determined by a technical committee.
I just wanted to come in here the bit on should it be the state or the center determining. As an industry, we've been engaging with the states as well as the center. When you look at the basic extension of your argument that are we looking at an 18th century law that was meant for gambling, and then they said because things moved online, the Public Gambling Act saw amendments, and then they were trying to again address gambling. To Suhan's point, this is precisely why we need to make sure that we continue to engage in states, but do not necessarily believe that states need to legislate on what is gambling versus what is gaming. What we're seeing increasingly is anecdotal evidence. We're seeing no scientific basis of a lot of ordinances that are coming out, and we're also seeing it unfortunately linked to the political season or the season of elections. So just because gaming is exciting and it's popular, and it's easy to create a boogie out of that and then slate, it doesn't necessarily translate into great legislation or law. Our simple premise is, to respond to what Shweta laid out, the government may not necessarily be the best person to tell you what kind of business model works. We've seen certain guidelines being put out where they're saying, please submit player data, and then the government's appointed committee can then tell you what to tweak so that it becomes a game of skill versus a game of chance. I see that as a very slippery road. You were taking this back to the old days of internet governance, where we say just because there's an elected government, that doesn't necessarily privilege one stakeholder over the other. The fact that you've run internet and you've had digital currencies and innovation, it's simply translated into that the industry has been responsible enough. We believe that you do not need to fix what is not broken. So, Shweta, to your point, it is very important that we understand that a lot of these provisions, whether it's cheating, whether it's fraud, the CRPC and the IPC already have provisions for it. I completely agree with Sohan when we say the IT Act needs some amendments so that you can look at the IT ministry as a central framework where we put out certain standards, where there is also support for the industry. Who do you really go to?
I'll just quickly come in here. IT ministry is the nodal ministry for
regulation. In our ask, Shweta, as an
there's a lot of conversation about the fact that this industry is closer to sports than it is to technology.
Not necessarily, Shweta. We very strongly disagree because there could be a format that could be close to sports, but we believe that the framework is IT and ITES, and that is where a lot of innovation happens. You have a front end and you have a back end, just like the internet. There are 7 layers of the internet. So while certain formats we want to look at sporting tournaments, but very firmly the broader consensus is we're looking at the Ministry of IT because we believe, just like the revolution of the 2000s, it's the back end of IT and ITES that helps us run this.
So, Avishkar, would you
Shweta,
agree?
just one last point. If you look at the blocking of the apps and where that regulation comes out of, it's the Ministry of IT and ITES. So therefore, we believe the central framework, and that is where our advocacy. We've engaged with the NITI Aayog, we've engaged with the Ministry of IT, and as an industry, we're proposing very strongly that we need an industry that has understanding of how innovation happens, how startups work, and how a lot of these IT-led innovations will reside. So, it's also about capacity to engage, right? Who has the capacity?
Your thought there is that the IT in ministry regulate because they have the capacity, they understand innovations.
Not regulate, Shweta. We are very strongly argued against regulation.
Yes, you're talking about self-regulation. At the same time, if there are guidelines to be put in place, or these self-regulatory bodies, whether it's AIF or other bodies, them engaging with the would in turn then recognize the self-regulatory codes. Is that correct, Subhi? So, Han, quick views then on IT ministry being the nodal ministry.
Yeah, so I think the fact of what would the sports ministry would have certain aspects only where now we know that esports is becoming an Olympic sport, the Asian Games, it's a medal sport. So there will be aspects that the sports ministry will look at. But the core and the foundation of this is essentially technology. And I think the standards, the safeguards and things like that will essentially come out of that. I also believe that you could have aspects being regulated under the Consumer Protection Act. So there is no one single place that you will end up going to. You will have different responsibilities having to be discharged by different ministries, and that nuance has to be understood by industry. Otherwise, what will happen is you may have the Ministry of Home Affairs that comes in, which looks at lottery, and sets down the guidelines for that. And because it's a center state piece, and in the states that it's under usually the excise or under the home department, it goes into MHA. So I think we have to be very, very careful in the way we articulate our asks, and what we want from government. Until we get that down and done in a very, very fine manner, we should not be asking for anything, I think it's important.
I think.
All right, we have literally 4 minutes to go. All right, Avishkar, I wanted to take closing comments.
I would take 30 seconds. If under the IT Act, under the intermediary guidelines, if these platforms that provide rummy and these games are held to be intermediaries, then they are automatically regulated under those guidelines. There cannot be any skill or regulation or gambling regulation under the IT Act, is my view, unless you have a separate set of guidelines. But their procedural, operational, requirements and etc., they can obviously be, regulated under the IT Act. That I'm in agreement with. But it's before the courts now, so the courts have to take a view either to recommend to Parliament to make a new law, uniform law, or whether to set up a committee that looks into all these issues regarding what is a game of skill, etc.
Just one last point very quickly. What happened and what's been happening with the telecom industry. The test of a great regulation is you're not before the courts every single day. I know we've got a lot of lawyers on the panel who've been batting for us. It's been very helpful to have them on our side. But it's very unfortunate that you're standing before the court and you're asking to legitimize your business. Why is it that we believe that unless a court has ruled your game is not the format of skill, it has to be the other way around? You're not supposed to be presumed that you're guilty or you could be possibly a bad actor. The legitimacy of the industry has to come through self-regulation, just as we've enforced and we've upheld great standards of editorial control when it comes to the media. When it comes to anything tech or anything innovation, the inherent assumption that hey, this could be bad, or just the fact that stakes are involved, you're assuming that this could be gambling. We have to deal with this at a perceptual level. We have to deal with this at a societal level. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you need a stamp of endorsement, and unless the matter goes to the Supreme Court. Imagine the kind of startups, the kind of democratization of game development, the kind of innovation that you're talking about, and then to say, let's drag it all the way to the courts, let the courts, it's expensive. So this is how you support an industry that's about innovation. This is how you kill an industry.
All right. So I think, Subi, on that note, we're going to wrap up the session, because I think the voice of the industry, at least, is very clear. You know what? We are responsible actors. We are responsible citizens. The industry is willing to come forward and address some of the concerns. Niharika, I know you wanted to talk a lot more about what those concerns are, including, cyberbullying and virtual crime, and what some of those policymakers' issues are. But I think we touched upon it in great detail.
It's a continuing conversation.
More time, but I think that the broad view is such an exciting and yet a subject where there are no easy answers. But given the fact that what we're seeing right now is tons of uncertainty and ambiguity, at the same time lack of clarity, but some very positive movements, like the recent judgment that both 𝗚𝗺𝗺𝗺 and Suhan have been talking about coming from the High Court, is a sign that continue educating policymakers. We need to continue educating all stakeholders across the board. But we can arrive to a point that, for instance, Subi was talking about, that you do not have to be going to the court every now and then. You have a very strong self-regulatory mechanism in place, which is recognized, appreciated by the government. So then it seems we still have the industry has that comfort, where the government has the comfort of the fact that that industry needs the recognition that it so badly deserves right now. With that, we'll wrap this session. So thank you all for your time, and we hope to continue these conversations both offline and in forums like these. Over to you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all our panelists. Thank you so much to our moderators. Thank you so much, everyone. It was a lovely chat. I would now like to proceed to the second session of the day, titled Esports, to regulate or not to regulate. For this, please welcome 𝗚𝗺𝗺𝗶𝗁, SVP, Legal and Policy, MPL, 𝗚rashl𝗵𝗺𝗺, co-founder and MD, Microgravity, Roland Landers, CEO, AIGF, and 𝗚𝗵𝗺𝗺𝗵, partner, Saraf and Partners. To moderate the session, we have 𝗚្રધર𝗵𝗺, advisor, Internet and Consumer Businesses. Over to you, 𝗚្રધર.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. It was a very interesting session we all heard before our panel, where there were strong views about what's skill versus chance, who should be regulating, state versus central. We're all biting our nails on what is it going to come next. And with that, we land up on a topic which sounds very simple: esports. Right now, the second part of the topic is a sensitive one, that's in, it's like to regulate or not. Now, I was actually talking to the organizers about 2 weeks back, and possibly the reason why they asked me personally to moderate the session is largely to do with luck by chance happened to me 4 years back when I was authoring one of the first ever reports on internet gaming in India as a part of my earlier organization. And I'm using the word internet gaming. And we had made a very passing reference to this phrase esports in that report. I'm talking about 4 years back, saying there's a new industry which may come up. There'll be a lot of engagement, blah, blah, blah. No numbers, no predictions, unlike usual consultants. Fast forward today, we are in 2021, and this is an industry which has grown and is getting its identity on its own, even though this panel is under the garb of India Gaming Summit. But this industry is getting its own self-assumed identity because it's more sports. Some numbers to tell, as industry reports say, $3.5 billion is the size of the industry in 2021. Rewind how e-commerce grew in India, $3.5 billion GMV would have been maybe 8, 9, 10 years back in India, right? About 1.5 to 2 lakh professional gamers who have dedicated their career, their time for this industry today. 15 to 20 million people who are viewing these. These are casual gamers and people like you and me who are viewing this as subscribers. Multiple platforms like the ones represented by our fellow panelists. That's how this industry has suddenly and silently grown in the past 3 to 4 years in India, and demanding that kind of a focus and spotlight among practitioners across the country, by regulators, so on and so forth. And aptly, the organizers have picked this as a topic and then adding to regulate or not to regulate, because the size is already considerable in the eyes of investors and practitioners. With that, I personally feel, we have a diverse set of panelists here, and even to start this topic of to regulate or not to regulate, I personally feel we should first, as professionals, try to define what are these sports, right? So I may just give my view as a independent moderator, and I'll take a specialist view. So sports, if you ask us, from kindergarten, we know sports are physical activity. In a nursery book will say sports, they usually say cricket or football. And then comes Vishwanathan Anand, sports graduated to something where grammar mattered. And fast forward today, we have added E to it. E in sports. How do you define it? Is it still sports alone? Is it gaming? Crudely put, is there a remote possibility, a gambling possibility involved in it? Is it only skill and practice and knowledge and capability which translates to playing by these professional players? Is there a remote chance of chance happening? So all these questions come up to me even before we get into the topic of, can we as a group talk about esports in a very simplistic manner for the large audience group here? How is it different? So with that, let me just first go to Rahul. Rahul, you run a platform which is now grown in the past 2-3 years, dedicating on esports as an industry. How would you define esports? And then I would move into Jyoti as well. And then Roland, and then Vaibhav, you can give your stamp of authority. This is esports. So Rahul, over to you first.
Thank you for the introduction, Sridhar. Yes, we are probably a company, and actually a startup which is trying to do a combination of online and offline, right? And the whole idea is to effectively complete the user's experience, right? Coming to the question of what is esports, I think I heard a very compelling last few minutes, in the last session, right? And that is exactly the way we would kind of describe esports. Esports is primarily a lot of world-class content which has been created where people play games that are multiplayer. Battle arena, for example, hundreds of people can actually come together to solve a mission. It's a multiplayer thing. There are first-person shooter games. You have a test of skill in terms of how good you are in terms of taking an aim and shooting it out. The real-time strategy games. So what happens is when world-class content is getting developed, where people get transported into a new world, it's actually a dream come true, right? For a lot of people, right? So players are either playing or they are watching. And when multiple players are playing or watching, that effectively becomes esports, right? I have to say that any content that is coming through into this realm has to be differentiated as a game of skill or a game of chance, right? So I think in my mind, esports is more a game of skill. So that's what I would say.
Jyoti, over to you.
Thank you. And I think I fully agree. The final moments of the last panel really set the tone for this one. And we should keep this free flowing. Well, to start off, and I think I was telling this to you, Sridhar, the other day. Well, all esports are games of skill, but all games of skill may not be esports. And I think that's a fundamental thing that we need to understand. Now, within esports, there could be multiple categories. You can try and define it by saying any competitive game that has the ability to be watched by millions of people is an esport. Particularly when it's done within a set format of a tournament or of a set format where real players are competing with each other, right? So it can't be really that you're competing against a bot, right? So that's fundamental. The other way of looking at it is to say, look, esports would include within its ambit online version of prominent offline sports. So, for example, where the Olympics has started, the Olympic virtual series. Or for example, where we have been building a game for e-shooting with the National Rifle Association. which copies the seat and trap formats, which are the globally accepted kind of Olympic medal formats, right? So these are various parts of esports, but it's also important to note that esports can also, within its ambit, because it's in the online world, have those games that have no physical counterpart as well, at all, right? And that's because the online world will give you the freedom to essentially explore things that you cannot do physically yet, right? So that's also important, and that's also important to understand that can also be part of esports. So I think there's a wide gamut of things. I think I agree with Rahul that there has to be an ability for millions to watch the game. I think I'm sure Weber will say that it has to be a competition between real players and it can't be bots. And I agree with all of that. And I also think that, like, any Olympic sport, by default, if there's an online version of it, qualifies as an esport.
Interesting. Before I let Vaibhav come in and destroy all of us, but I think Anand defeated some computer at some point, right? So can I fight with the bot, and can that be esports is also a question to debate. Anyways, Vaibhav, over to you, getting your views on what do you think is esports?
First of all, thank you very much for having me over. And it's a great question that you ask. It's important to get the conceptual understanding right. I think, as Rahul and Divijyoti both very aptly pointed it out, I think it's ultimately any sporting endeavor that one undertakes and commits to in the online and virtual world, as one would in the physical world. I'm ultimately a lawyer. In fact, Sohan was involved from one of the petitioners. I was the lawyer for the other petitioners in the Madras High Court. I just finished another completion of arguments in Kerala. And the way we actually explained to the judges was that, my lord, we were earlier physically present before you when you were arguing. And now we are doing it in the virtual medium. Doesn't mean that the nature of arguments doesn't mean that this will not be regarded as a court hearing. Similarly, just because there is a gaming event or there is a particular game being played by certain players in the online world, and I think all of these businesses have really sort of got a huge momentum, unintended benefits of COVID and what that's got everybody to now in their house, and people are looking at alternative ways to keep themselves entertained. I think in that backdrop, I think it's important to continue recognizing this as a separate bucket altogether. I think where the challenge, Sridhar, essentially arises is that the moment you attach money to it, that's where, when people are putting, bets and committing certain funds to it, and I use the word bets very loosely here, but when somebody is committing certain fees to the event, and there is an outcome of there's an expectation of a monetary reward outside at the outcome of it, that's when, the judges, the regulators, the government starts thinking, is this close to gambling? And the irony is, we actually explained to the judges as well to say that, my lord, this happens all the time in golfing tournaments where people commit funds of one player against the other's skill as to who will sort of complete the course in the shortest possible time. And often we have golfing tournaments, tennis tournaments, where you pay a participation fee at the outset, and there's an expectation of a monetary reward should you end up winning it. Now, that doesn't make those games, tantamounting to gambling. Then why would you have a different view just because it's held in a virtual medium? And I think that's where, I sort of agree with some of the ending notes that were there of the previous session as well, which is that there needs to be a perceptible change in how you look at esports. And I think what has happened is, Sridhar, that the courts have started understanding this nuance quite well. You've seen what the Madras High Court has said. Eventually, what the Madras High Court has ruled is very clearly stating that if you're committing funds or resources to an activity which involves skill, then it is akin to undertaking any other business activity. You talked about, Sridhar, of lack of gamers who have committed their lives. It's something similar. So if you're actually committing financial resources to a particular activity where skill is preponderant, then it is akin to you and I committing funds to a new startup, you and I committing funds in a stock market, and there nobody questions that whether this is gambling or not. And so therefore, and that is where the High Court has stepped in the case that we were arguing extensively to say that these are games of skill, And therefore, committing funds to a game of skill is a business activity for which every citizen of this country has a fundamental right under Article 19(1)(g). And there is this whole theory, Sridhar, of res extra commercium, which is that certain activities are sinful activities, say alcohol industry, lottery industry, gambling industry, where fundamental rights are not for the asking. And states have an inherent right to ban it, which is why you see each time there's elections, certain states go and declare certain states as dry states. And alcohol industry does not have a fundamental right to challenge the constitutionality of that ban, because there is an implicit, construct of a parent's patria, that state is the parent and it can take care of its citizens, and sinful activities is where they have to steer clear of. But insofar as skill activities is concerned, I think the Madras High Court judgment is a very welcome one. One needs to see whether Tamil Nadu government ultimately challenges it in the Supreme Court, or they've threatened in a press release that they may bring in another law. But the direction of the High Court was a very positive one, which is to say, once it's a skill-based game and you're committing funds to that, even if it's in the virtual medium, there should be no question marks as to whether that is gambling or not. It is a fundamental business activity for which every citizen has a fundamental right. And at most, states can only regulate it. I just want to bring everyone's attention, Sridhar, to a tangential point, that there is this one entry 33 under the state list in the constitution, which states sports, entertainment, and amusement. I can't find an entry which fits better to what esports is all about. And, we were all debating about, essentially whether, state should regulate it or center. But I do believe fundamentally that center does not have any jurisdiction. It's entry 33. Entry 34 is gambling and betting, where thankfully the courts are saying, now you don't no longer fall within that. You are a skill-based activity. And Supreme Court also 1 week back, in the context of fantasy league games, has also sort of upheld that they are very much protected games. Gambling laws won't get attracted. So then they're likely to fall under 33, where then you move towards states regulating them. Once this, these gray areas of legitimacy start waning away. That's how I'd sort of give my initial remark.
Interesting. Very well said. I remember the last part of what you said about sports, esports versus gaming. We'll pick it up during the course of the conversation. You just hear Roland before I...
If I can just comment for 30 seconds before Roland does. I think what Weber was saying is correct, because you cannot make a career out of drinking or smoking, but you can make a career out of doing professional gaming. So that's what is the key and core part of what the Madras High Court judgment says. They actually give examples of people who have made their careers in professional gaming. So anything that you can make a career out of it cannot be a sin activity, like say gambling or alcohol or smoking.
Roland, I'll take your views as well, and then we can have an open conversation.
Sorry, I missed the earlier part, so I don't know the context.
Roland, we were just setting the context for the larger crowd on what is esports in each of our views, and we heard Weber, Jyoti, and Rahul. From your perspective, what's esports?
Yeah, thanks, Sridhar. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here amongst all of y'all. Thank you, Sridhar. By definition itself, it would mean video game, multiplayer video games played competitively for spectators by pro players. That would define esports. But what we are seeing in the Indian context, obviously, is that it's a mobile first market, and there are certain elements that are similar to virtual gaming, like Weber mentioned. I think more than online gaming, now virtual gaming the courts are using. So we'll stick to that. But yeah, entry, so played competitively for a prize. There's entry a fee most of the times, and also this entire thing about tournaments. So that could, if it's played competitively in a tournament format, then that would expand the scope of esports largely. And that would be my opening comments as far as esports and defining it is concerned.
Thanks, Roland, and thanks, panelists. Interesting way of bringing in, and one word which I think one of us used has been that not anybody's game. So what I was reflecting is possibly the doubts about esports have come in because it comes under the larger umbrella of gaming, right? And I think Dibjot, you made a point of every esports is skill based, and every skill based may not be esports. but possibly, the gaming connotation is bringing in this doubts about what is esports in the minds of everybody. And what I hear from most of you is esports is professional sports on a digital platform or a digital arena, so on and so forth. Rahul would say, I do phygital in my company, but still there is a digital element involved. But the professional angle to it is what negates possibly any comparison with normal gaming, casual gaming, gambling, X, Y, Z. So akin to cricket or IPL or whatever it be, the professional who is playing, representing a team with the only objective of winning, armed with his years of practice and so on and so forth. That differentiates esports as a larger umbrella from rest of gaming and the rest of doubts about skill versus chance versus skill, which is very relevant to most of internet games in the world. Possibly not as relevant because by virtue of being esports, you have to have the skill to play. Like in cricket, the chance is only the toss. So for that, let me just bring to the next level. To regulate or not, the question comes in with what to regulate, right? So the various elements you touched upon, some of you touched upon, whether it is the game publisher, to the teams, to the professional player, to the people who put marketing dollars into it, to the broadcasting guys, to the platforms like a couple of you guys. So there are various elements who are actually playing various roles in the game. And rewind back, maybe 2016, government came up with Press Note 3 for e-commerce, getting it more as a guideline first, then it graduated multiple levels, right? So maybe then it was on a focus of one party and to see how to protect that party's interest, then added more parties. Now there is a consumer protection in e-commerce, so on and so forth. Fast forward today, this is a larger organization, larger ecosystem with many players. Where do you start with? Do I start with the competitive player? Do I start with people like Rahul and Dipjyoti who are actually platforms and possibly publishers? Do I start with people like me who are casual gamers who aspire possibly someday to be a professional gamer? Where do I start my thought of giving? I'm not using the word regulation right now, Vaibhav, but let's start with guidelines on how should esports be viewed in the country. Where do I start? Let me just come first with maybe I'm making it open. Please give your views, guys.
Yeah, I think couple of things, Sridhar, that's very important. I'll let Vaibhav and Rahul maybe chime in on the exact regulation and Roland, of course. I think a couple of points to make there. One, what is unique about esports as opposed to any other sport is the publisher angle and the control that the publisher has. Now, for example, if you want to play cricket, all you need is a bat and a ball, right? But if you want to play a game like a Clash Royale or any of the games that are part of the Asian Games, you need the permission of the publisher. And if the publisher decides to take down the game, it cannot be played by anybody in the world. Now, that's very, very, very unique to esports. And that's where, I mean, to me, that's where the starting of the regulation should be. The second thing to mention about esports is the esport is not one sport. And that's important to understand, right? Cricket also and all these sports also evolve over time, but esports is much faster. Now, Age of Empires was played in the 1990s. It's not played as much now. Counter-Strike stayed sometime. Now it was PUBG. Maybe now it'll be Battleground, some other game. So this is also changing really fast. Now, why I make that point is because then the law needs to be as fast and dynamic, which obviously will be difficult if you're going to try and pass a central law every time there is a new game that's coming up. Which is why it's probably very important in this industry to self-regulate and to have a light touch regulatory model, say like how the All India Gaming Federation does through its charter, or say what the Federation of Indian Fantasy Sports does through its charter, right? So that's, I think those are my two basic submissions. Look at the publishers and look at self-regulation.
Over to others. Roland, you were raising a hand.
Yeah. So, I think to add to what Dipjyoti is saying, we have to look at it from, I agree with what he's saying, and also the, we have to break it up, as you mentioned, the player side. So, as a federation, as the, Apex Industry Body Federation for virtual gaming, online gaming, and including esports, we are, business oriented. We are focused towards the business side, not necessarily, the player side. But in esports, that's an important component as well, the pro gamer. So from the business perspective, I think that, if we take the larger online gaming industry as a benchmark, then, that it's about 12 years old. It continues to be self-regulated. Now, in the esports is, even more nascent, probably 3-4 years old only, or maybe 5 years old. So, I think, as DJ mentioned, it would be best to, self-regulate with some light touch as far as the businesses are concerned, and processes being followed and things like that, where entry fee is involved, where prize payouts are involved and things like that, which has similarity to online games and the way we self-regulate. Coming to the player side, now that I think where there is, so we've had a consultative call with the sports ministry on what should be done for Asian Games, for example, next year. Now, definitely, there's this entire need, like any physical sport, you would need the identification, the training, and all of that of the pro players would represent in each of the selected formats of the esports that are going to be played competitively in that tournament. So now that part is something where I think platforms or businesses, it could be a partnership arrangement where the platforms like MPL and other could identify the talent, because as for a country as big as ours, I mean, for let's say any one of these competitive sports, let's say it's the first FPS game, which I don't know really which are the formats chosen for the Asian Games. Let's take any one of them. Hearthstone was there last time, but to identify talent in millions would really be difficult for for a governmental body to like a physical sport like archery, for example. If you do it digitally, virtually, you will get millions of archery players, but if you do it physically, you may get some thousands, 10,000 coming to be selected. So now identifying of that, platforms like these, like MPL and all, can really identify a large pool, and then there is some regulation could be there as to who would be selected, who could be trained and put together to be played competitively. And the third part, I think so from the business side, I think the self-regulation would work well. For the talent identification, training, and all of that, I think there could be some process which could be followed like you do in physical sport, like cricket, for example.
Rahul, your views?
Yeah, sure. I think some interesting points, and the insights. I'll try and paraphrase from my point of view as a business, right? So if you look at who are the stakeholders, right? So we all talked about the players, right? They have a certain ambition. We have the publishers and the creators, right? So they effectively come through with the content and the infrastructure service, which allows us to not only play but watch, view, broadcast, make money, of course, right, to advertising channels, right? Then we have the sponsors and the advertisers who get the mileage out of millions of people either playing or watching, right? There are endemic brands, there are like who are associated with the gaming industry, and then there are the non-endemic brands who kind of want to target many more people, right? So effectively, and of course, I don't want to discount the fact that there are a lot of emerging teams and clubs, which we could probably put in the players section, right? Effectively, what the way I see it is that, as Vaibhav pointed out, the moment players are committing money, either through subscription or through the ability to win prizes, and go a little further down the lane, and you're actually betting on the outcome, right? Whenever, so the idea is to kind of see at what point in the life cycle of that contribution, each of the games, what is happening in that sense. Second, content. See, there are different content, right? I mean, just the other day, I was speaking to an American baseball federation. They wanted to enter into the Indian market, and they have a combination offering of the way we are, right? So we are doing physical as well as digital. So they have digital games, and then they culminate. So they want to culminate most of these digital promotions at a physical location. So if you look at content, right, some of the digital games we saw, it's actually mirroring life in general, right? And I have to say that a lot of these algorithms, these are all software. At the end of the day, there is a logic behind it. And it is constantly being developed over a period of time. We don't know at the moment where we are headed, right? So if we stifle the industry right now, it will be a very, I think we need more investments, more analysis. The maturity needs to, sophistication needs to start building out on its own. So we probably don't know the impact of a lot of things. So the content needs to be regulated. The content is either a game of skill or a game of chance in the two ends of the spectrum. But in the middle, I think the idea is to ensure that there is a certain regulatory framework or a rating system. It's okay, it is a game of skill. There is still an element of risk because we are discovering the whole idea of what kind of impact or what kind of, at the end of the day, most of these games respond to physical stimulus, whether you're playing online or offline. It's a sport, right? So it's responding. So mostly, if games are mirrored with sports that are already there on the ground, right, then the chances are that element of risk is reduced because mostly you have the controls to control all the moves. But the moment I came across a very, very interesting game, right? For example, in FIFA 21, right, you can actually be in a career mode. You can be a man. You could be a player like Messi, right? Or you could be a manager like Alex Ferguson and see how much money you make, right? So, from buying players to take players from one club to the other, seeing how successful you are. So these are all different facets. What I wanted to say was there's going to be humongous amount of content which is getting developed all across the world, and there is high potential in a lot of them. And we as businessmen, we would like to test it out with people to see what works and what doesn't work, right? So effectively, I think self-regulation would be an important way forward where publishers and developers call out, what is the level of control and how much of a game of a skill. And then, of course, Roland, you mentioned about the business models. I think there are IPs around it protecting. I think if there are certain restrictions in our economy, in our country, I think also making sure that access to people to foreign websites through VPN, for example, is quite easy. So, the regulations actually touch a lot of things, right? It's a very vast, very complex subject at the end of the day.
May I bring Vaibhav here now? Vaibhav, given a chance, where do you start this with? We'll come back to the self-regulation with the most sensitive point about this topic, which I heard Dibajyoti as well as Rahul talk about. We'll come back to that a little later. But where do we start this with? That's what intrigues me because there are so many players, everybody has vested interest. Where do you start this?
No, I think it's a very fair question you asked, Sridhar. And I'll actually have to take everyone who's participating in this panel to the completely the other side of the spectrum. The reality is that if you go and speak to the government, to the regulators, to potential agencies that you wish to be regulated from, or for that matter, judges in court, the reality is that they still view all of these businesses as indulgences, and they don't really sort of see them, in a country where you're still talking of a per capita income of $2,000. And with where we are on, and there are, of course, the economies really sort of bounce back post COVID, but I think in the context of where the socio-economics context is cannot be sort of ignored. And the reality is that the regulators, the judges, I just, in addition to all the gaming companies that I've represented in the Madras Challenge in Kerala, in Telangana, in Andhra, I've also happened to represent Tencent and PUBG in this country, and I'm sort of the one who's sort of leading that charge after the ban, and have also historically represented Niantic for their very famous game Pokemon Go. And but I can tell you for a fact that when you go and try and discuss this with the regulators of the government, they actually believe that these are actually sinful activities. They are indulgences of rich man, and this is not something anybody can take up and sort of commit to and change that person's life. And I think that is a pure issue of perception. That issue of perception can only be addressed by these wonderful sessions that we are having today, and I don't mean it just for the sake of it, is to create awareness. And until you reach a point of maturity, every industry will have to self-regulate itself in a way that it gives confidence to the government and to the regulators that nobody is going to try and pull a fast one here. There is nobody who's going to take a regulatory arbitrage. See, I always believe, Sridhar, that wherever there is a gray area, And wherever there is regulatory uncertainty, that's where there's an opportunity. Otherwise, if the particular position of law was so absolutely clear in regulation, I don't think certain businesses would do so well. It's then there becomes a question of first movers advantage and things like those. So I think there has been a gray area here. There's been an opportunity. Certain mature and well-reputed platforms, such as the one that, for instance, Dibajyoti represents, Rahul sort of represents, have all sort of taken up that opportunity. Now it's the responsibility of operators to work, come up with a self-regulatory framework, create a sense of awareness, and take it from there. In terms of constitutionally and regulation-wise, Sridhar, I think I have, as I've said it earlier, I have no confusion in my mind. You have a very specific entry under the state list called sports, entertainment, and amusements. And therefore, anybody who's suggesting that the central government should step in, I think is completely ignoring what the reality and the constitutional scheme is. So therefore, eventually you will have to move towards state regulating it. In fact, Sridhar, I also want to take this opportunity to share with everybody in the audience as well that we've seen 4 instances over 6 litigations in the last 5 years. And in each of those litigations, whenever the central government is filed in an affidavit, whether it's 𝗚𝗵𝗺, whether it's the Ministry of Home Affairs, they've always taken a step back to say, if there is money involved, then there is entry 34, which is gambling and betting, which is not subject matter. If it is in the nature of sporting and other sort of skill-based entertainments, then it is entry 33, which is the state list. And the center will only get involved insofar as the use of the information technology platform is concerned. And 𝗚𝗵𝗺's remitted role will be to regulate intermediaries in the light touch manner that they do under the IT Act. And so therefore, you will essentially, you can try and keep shifting the ball towards the center. Center will keep taking it back until and unless you create a financial incentive. Shira, you're from the KPMG background and you're a stalwart there. But eventually, how do you incentivize the state and the center? It will have to come from taxing. It'll have to come from taxation. Unfortunately, center is already extracting a huge pound of flesh in terms of GST. And they believe there is no additional incentive. States, on the other hand, only get indirect benefit on account of center GST whenever they share that with the states. So there is no additional incentive for any of these bodies right now to legitimize you. That can only happen if you give some extra carrot to the state governments where they can extract some licensing revenue. But there, Sridhar, what will be very important is that they don't throw the baby out of the bathwater. What we're seeing in e-commerce, you and I were part of that whole play when suddenly marketplaces are recognized. Today, you're at the other end of the spectrum where you're not only going to throw the baby out of the bathwater, you're maybe even throwing the kitchen sink and the bathtub itself outside the bathwater when you're doing what you're doing at the moment. So it's very important that you come up with light touch regulation. The way to perhaps approach this, and I see this in a sequential manner, is keep creating awareness, keep creating discussions around these issues, get media to pick it up, also cover stories of average commoner who's turned around their lives by actually indulging in gaming or rather esports, and how that's had a transformational role, because that will change perception. One is that. The second part, of course, would be on the back of that, every industry or every body talks of self-regulation, uses that as a pitching point to maybe get Ministry of Sports to come up with some model guidelines, how you saw in RERA. Real estate is, of course, a state subject, but you first had a model RERA law. You can have a model guidelines coming from there, and then you use that as a platform and try and pitch that to maybe get 1 or 2 prominent states to adopt some licensing frameworks. Prominent states, I don't mean no disrespect to any state in this country, but having some sort of a mild framework from a northeastern state where there's very little operations has not really had the impact. And use that as a way to start getting the whole business, the legitimization that it really needs. One last point, Sridhar, I just want to make, I know time is running out, is the fact that if I have to look at it purely constitutionally and legally, should this industry be regulated? I think to my mind, the answer would be clearly yes and no in 2 buckets. One is wherever there is pure games that are being played in sporting competitions happening where there's no element of money, I think those should just be left untouched. as any other technology-based platform is currently, with mild touch regulations under 79 of the IT Act. On the other hand, where there is going to be participation fee, there's going to be expectation of a reward at the end of the day. I think there will continue to remain question marks. You will start introducing bots as players in the game or a platform you can compete against them. Then there will again be question marks of gambling. And there I do feel eventually you'll have to move to some light touch regulation from states with giving them some financial incentive. And that's the only two buckets in which you'll have to look at this whole prism. Sorry if that was a long-winded response to myself.
I'm trying to segue to the last part, but yeah, your last point of the state having a role in such a large industry. I have my total different views, but I'll hold on. But to the rest of the panelists, just a point. This is my personal view on this. If the business models of esports is clear, a regulation can follow is one option. A regulation preceding and making a business model comply in such a large dynamic business like what Dipjyoti said, every day new games are coming. For the size of our nation, personally, I believe is a little dangerous. So the business models precede regulation, which means the business model need to be transparent and clear, and there is a very conscious self-regulation. On that aspect, I agree with self-regulation, even though I'm moderating. Self-regulation leading to the clarity of business model, and then thinking about what should be the guideline and then what body should guide it, so on and so forth, as a sequence. If I say is one option, how would you three gentlemen react? Dipjyoti, to start with you.
No, I was about to say I can't agree more with what Vaibhav was saying and the blueprint that he and you have put together. That's absolutely the correct way of thinking about this. I fully agree that and I know for a fact that the IT ministry has been repeatedly saying that our role doesn't, beyond regulating tech platforms, it's not to go and decide what's a skill, what's a chance, what are the rules to be followed in a tournament involving skills, so on and so forth. So it's either going to be sports, entertainment, or so on and so forth, right? I know there's been a lot of talk about, like, on this panel about the involvement of money, but it's important to understand, if you want to make a professional career out of esports, then you necessarily need a way for people to earn playing esports. Now, if you're going to do that, then there is also has to be necessarily a way for the tournament organizers, the publishers, and everybody else in the ecosystem to make money of it. Because like any other business, sports is also a business. So it's going to be difficult to expect that we are going to have no involvement of money in a country where it's so difficult, to host tournaments. It's so difficult to conduct this, and it's so difficult for people to earn. It's going to be a little difficult to do it completely without money. Now, I agree that anything that doesn't involve money should not be regulated. Of course, my minor submission is there. I mean, I can't think of one online game today, including say a PUBG, etc., where you cannot spend money, right? You might buy a virtual gun, a loot box, or whatever it is, right? So I'm just reiterating that, like, it's probably not the right expectation, and I don't think anybody on the panel has that expectation. But in the government circles and so on and so forth, that's what we have been telling them, to expect that this will happen without the involvement of money at any point, right? And whatever you have to do, you have to take that reality into account. That's my
perfect. Rahul, Roland, a quick 1 minute each from your side on.
Yeah, I have only one thing to say. I think esports phenomena, at the end of the day, as Dipjyoti pointed out, it's a business. We seek investments in the market to take it to the next level. I think in the last 5 years, I'm not mistaken, about $165 million got invested in the esports world, and we are expecting about almost $500 million to $1 billion to come in by 2025. So it's very, very important to not stifle the industry and this growing phenomena. I think I would completely agree with Vaibhav and Dipjyoti on the fact that light touch self-regulation initially on games of skill, and a little more progressive approach towards the ones which are games of chance is what I would propose.
Roland, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, on from my side, I would say that the business model right now, because it is in its nascent stage, hasn't fully evolved. So we're just seeing maybe sponsorship money or the publisher putting in monies to promote their games and titles and things like that, and some entry fee to participate, etc. However, there's this entire like uh, like the business of sport in the physical world. There would be this entire broadcast piece that would get added to as it evolves further, and of course there would continue to be large sponsors both at the team side, at the at the league side, and that would take this to another level. So that business model is very clear. Just like the business of sport evolved, the esport business will also evolve. And then from the I fully agree with what Vaibhav said, that and this is actually what has happened. We've been talking to a few states as the AIGF to look at the self regulation model, and then to support that, to endorse that, and recognize that, and also come up with some guidelines that states can do to support the businesses that are in the esports realm, and at the same time then the entire ecosystem kind of grows. So I think what EY has mentioned in the report, the recent report, is that this would reach about, like Rahul mentioned, about maybe about 1,500 crores by 2025. So, but when the broadcast and all that elements come into play, then it's really going to explode. So we look forward to that.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone on our time check. Actually supposed to summarize the discussion, but instead let me open a question to all the readers, viewers, and people here. So we touched upon what to regulate, and I heard the self-regulation phrase coming up, and then I had a point that some of you agreed to on business models being more transparent. The question is, who will regulate, right? So in India, in internet businesses, we heard many names, IT industry, sports industry, DIPP. There are many players, the state versus center, so on and so forth. I personally believe in many other industries, it's still easier to tag one to another. Here, since everybody's involved, there's a game developer technology platform, there's a sports element to it, there is money element to it, there's investor element to it. I think that is the most complicated problem to think about, on either having an apex body being created eventually, which can think through this in collaboration with all the other current regulatory bodies, to think through and then invest in making this considered as an industry by itself and not being a possible subset of what's crudely called internet gaming. I'm an advocate of that. Internet gaming is internet gaming, right? And that's where Vaibhav's point of it is, it's a rich man's game. You throw money and you play around. But esports globally is a form of career. Esports is business. And that distinction, as practitioners, audience, and as businessmen, if all of us are able to make the distinction very, very clear, the next year when Financial Express does the same event, we'll have a separate day for esports, called it the Esports Summit. With that, let me wind up. Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks for your time, and all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for the wonderful and insightful session. We now move on to our next session for the day, titled Next Gen Gamers. The session will explore how youth can look at developing a serious career in the gaming industry. For this, please welcome Khalid Wani, Director, India, Southeast Asia, Middle East, Africa, Western Digital India, Sanjeev Mehtani, Country Manager, Government and SMB Sales, Acer India, and 𝗚្�្�િ្�្� Country Head, Logitech. The session will be moderated by Saurabh Singh, Assistant Editor, FE.com. Over to you, Saurabh.
PC gaming, console gaming has really gone up significantly. Multiple reports have said that PC gaming is on the rise in India in the pandemic. Pandemic gave a lot of push to it. Going forward in 2021, there are multiple reports from Intel, other PC makers, component manufacturers saying that it's just going to be all uphill from here for PC gaming, console gaming, and it's just tremendous the sort of potential that we have in this industry all of a sudden in India, because India has conventionally been a mobile-first market, and just to see this growth in the last 1 year is just phenomenal. So, would you want to start with this, Khalid? Just give us a little bit about the India story, just around PC gaming in India. What is the story so far?
Saurabh, what practically I think started as a means to fight the lockdown blues at home
has potentially turned into a more or less of a full-time profession for a lot of people out there, with more and more people turning into devoted gamers, right? If you look at from the industry perspective, I read a recent research and a report about the growth that the Indian PC gaming market, or the entire online gaming market, is expected to see over the next coming couple of years. By 2022 alone, we're going to witness the market to potentially be in the size of around 2.8 to 3 billion odd dollars, right? Which is roughly around a 40% CAGR over the next couple of years. Moreover, if you look at the recent trends, it really is showing how much the online gaming, which was predominantly driven by male gamers to an extent, is now witnessing a major transformation. We see male, female gamers getting transitioned to the PC gaming quite significantly, right? As PC and game developers continue to tackle security threats and ensure scalability, these factors will contribute towards the fundamental growth of the PC gaming segment in the country, right? Thus, in my opinion, when you look at the PC gaming in the country, it's potentially capable of becoming a global gaming industry of the decade in the next coming couple of years. And right now, if you look at what is happening in the last couple of years, we've already come into that top 5 gaming countries from the worldwide perspective. I think it's a matter of time. We will continue to see India moving up the ladder and potentially becoming one of the largest PC gaming markets from the global perspective.
That's some good news. That's huge. Sanjeev, you want to say something about this?
Yeah, I agree with Khalid. Actually, if you look at there is a boom. Even if we look at infrastructure-wise, the product-wise, we are talking of. I mean, he already mentioned regarding the revenue terms. I'll say we have somewhere around 150 million users today who are into gaming, which is likely to go up. In 2024, it is estimated it will be somewhere around 270 sport, participants. If we look at actually mobile devices as well, I mean, since we are talking of right now only PC gaming, but potentially if we look at the mobile devices, then we are talking of somewhere around 365 million, which is likely to go to 570. And some of these mobile users, naturally, when they become gamer in real time, they will also move to PC devices. So what Khalid is saying is very, very true. I think this basic penetration of internet has actually, I mean, as he said, lockdown has given opportunity to people to actually play. However, one of the reasons why this penetration is happening is internet has actually gone to villages. Internet has gone to each and every cities. We have a better internet penetration today, which has also actually given rise to these kind of gaming. I think only few constraints which I see still, which can actually improve, this e-sport. One of them is definitely availability of devices. I mean, if I look at today, these devices, they are costlier devices. Currently, whenever we are talking of gaming, even for beginners, we are talking of PC device being available at 50 to 60 grand and upward. And the real-time gaming, when it comes to that is actually very costly. So one, the device, when the demand is increasing, definitely the cost is decreasing. However, still that device is one of the restrictions for PC sport. So there are ways to take care of that, which we possibly will be talking about. The other which I see is internet last mile bandwidth. Last mile bandwidth is still not improved. I think not many people are working on that. Technologically, they are working on that to give a last mile connectivity. Once that happens, the other part which I'll say, the restriction part, I see it as training. Today, it is more of a sport. When we are talking of gaming, it is more of a sport which is, I mean, professional becomes professional, first he is actually a basic gamer. I mean, once they have the training skill set developed on their own, then they become a gamer. However, we don't have, even today, we don't have actually training available to them, professional training available to them. So I think that is one part which I'll say that is something which, to boost gaming, that will be something which will be required. So that is how I see gaming industry today.
Very, very interesting. Srinivas, you would want to add on something to this? Very, very good insights on this.
First of all, thank you, Saurabh, for having me here. Actually, couldn't agree more from Khalid and what Sanjeev said. So basically, what I see is it's a huge growth, and basically gaming. What we see is actually an evolution there, and from, as what Sanjeev said, from a casual gamer to a more serious gamer, and there are people really working on that, and of course, as Khalid said, this whole pandemic has actually turned the people into at homes. So they are working from home, what we call as work from home. And in the evenings, they play from home and they stream from home, right? So this is actually added the tailwinds there. And we see a huge opportunity there.
So pandemic and the internet, two very, very big reasons why PC gaming is kicking up. Is there a third reason? Is there a fourth reason? Not as, that doesn't stand out as much, but it's there and it's very important for the growth of PC gaming, aside from the pandemic and internet, of course.
Look, sure. I think the other thing that we are witnessing is, if you look at it's an opportunity and a challenge by itself as well, right? I mean, you look at how gaming also has evolved over the last couple of years as a professional platform, right? Though I believe there's a lot more to be done in order to have greater platforms that can offer a large professional opportunity for gamers to engage in, right? I think traditionally what happens is for gamers, in my opinion, the green light from the parents also sometimes is very, very important, right? There are restrictions that from society perspective that we do have for gamers, right? But the more we see gamers being able to monetize the pro league gaming, right? And with the availability of the platforms that we have, but I do wish that there are a lot more platforms available which allow people to professionally take up gaming as a large scale opportunity. And that's when, when Sanjeev mentioned the accessibility of devices, because at device level, when you talk about pro gaming, and I'm sure we'll come through that over the course of the discussion, how critical and how important it is. I believe the more the ecosystem develops over the next coming couple of years, and the more robust and greater platforms that we have, which encourage pro gamers to go out there and explore, I think that is going to witness yet another, that'll become yet another catalyst, basically consistently grow this segment a lot more wider, right? And I agree with Sanjeev, right? I mean, last mile access, ability to adopt technology. There'll always continue to be, certain areas that we will have to overcome. But I'm so super excited about this segment, man. I mean, I can tell you that this is one of, in my opinion, is going to be one of the fastest growing segments that the country will witness over the next few years.
So I'd like to add, Khalid, I agree with you completely, but I'd like to add, see, when you said 2-3 more points which have actually led to the development, one of the points is what he was talking about, platform availability itself, which is available today. Today we are talking of something like 400 startups in gaming, right? Which was never the case actually as far as India is concerned. 90 development centers who are working on gaming, which is also giving opportunity to people to become test gamers. I mean, one of my friends, actually son, who used to actually love, playing games at home. Today, he is actually testing the games at home, doing the same thing, working from home, but for testing and earning. So we have actually traveled a large distance, which was not there available yesterday. The second is definitely the device availability, which I'll say definitely that is much better. We are talking in terms of not only technologically advanced devices being available, but definitely we are also talking of at a lesser cost it is being available. So what is happening is the student which was actually an engineering student, I mean, let me put it this way very practically, an engineering student, he was anyway buying a device which was actually with a upgraded RAM, upgraded graphic and things of that sort. So what he is doing today, he is using it for two purposes. He is buying a gaming device which can actually also play games, and he is becoming a initial, what we call it, a beginner, right? So he's actually getting into that gaming part by the same device. He's just upgrading it because at same kind of a cost which was available at a graphic device which was available earlier. Today a gaming device is available. So that is actually a revolution. And if you look at the OEMs who have come up with these kind of devices, plethora of options are available. Earlier options were one or two. If you have to actually talk of gaming, then you were talking of 1.5 lakh plus kind of a device. Today you can start at 50,000 bucks. So that is something which, and the third, I mean, the way I see things, 5G connectivity is going to actually, uh, I would say, that will explode the opportunities. That is what I'll say. And so I'm looking forward to that, that era where we have the 5G connectivity available across, right? Right now we are only on an experiment stage, is what I would say. But I'm actually excited about this industry because of the 5G connectivity. I'm sure this is going to bring it to the next level, as Khalid said.
So 5G, 5G is going to be a big disruptor, Sanjeev says. Do you agree, Srinivas, with this?
Absolutely, absolutely. 5G internet connectivity. In addition to what Sanjeev said, what Khalid said, what I would also like to highlight is what you call as the skill set of the gamers. The people are honing the overall games. Skill sets are improving. 5G is improving. Entire ecosystem is coming together. Look at 3, 4, 5 years back. We had issues from an ecosystem perspective. Today, the game developers, we as the gaming peripherals at Logitech, whether it's Khalid, whether it's Sanjeev, the ecosystem is coming together, and with internet connectivity improving, I think we are really looking at a phenomenal growth in terms of the gaming there.
So clearly, very exciting days ahead, exciting days coming in. The word enthusiast is thrown around a lot in India, and because India is such a young and evolving and emerging market, it's fair to say that it's there in some verticals. What do you think is the case when it comes to PC gaming right now in 2021? Is this still enthusiast only market, or people are actually starting to get serious about PC gaming, as probably take it as a profession in the days to come, maybe?
So Saurabh, again, absolutely. Basically, the way we look at is gaming is evolving. People start with more of a casual gaming, wherein they mostly for the passing of the time they started. But as they move on, they hone their skills and they start looking at competing with against others. And this is where esports come into play, and they play across, and it's something like where and therefore the gaming gear becomes very, very important, right? And it's something like you look at take the example of a cricket. For a cricketer, the cricket bat becomes very, very important. Similarly, for a gaming, I would not call it an enthusiast, but for a gaming professional, the gaming gear becomes very, very important. And that's where we as an ecosystem really work with the gamers to provide that infrastructure and those gears to the gamers.
Khalid, you would want to add to this?
Yeah, just a couple of comments, right? I think what we have to understand is, without an iota of doubt, we are one of the world's youngest population, right? And when you look at from a country perspective,
it's strongly, and I agree with what Srinivas said, right? I mean, the life cycle of a gamer develops from being a casual gamer to an enthusiast, and then gradually progressing towards a professional gaming environment, right? And the more you move towards professional gaming environment, the more you realize how important the PC gaming becomes a part of the professional gamer because of of significantly better experience, right? Let me tell you about myself, right? I'm an avid my 10-year-old. I love to play Call of Duty Cold War along with him at times, right? And while he has migrated, or he plans to migrate, and he comes back and says, "Baba, I mean, I feel that PC gaming has a lot more advantage, with regards to lag times. I can react faster. My PlayStation doesn't give me that experience, right?" I mean, you can see that evolution in the life cycle of a gamer will always be there. And eventually, I believe that PC gaming does offer a lot more a better gaming experience for those avid gamers. But now, from country perspective, you also see the enthusiasts. Eventually, a lot of these enthusiast gamers will kind of continue to migrate and go into the pro space. And a lot of them would continue to be like me, who will probably stick into the enthusiast gaming because that's something that you do more for fun and frolic for whatever time that you have available.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So what Khalid said, it's like an evolution from a casual gaming to an enthusiast to a pro. And for a pro, obviously, what, as again Sanjeev said, the gaming gears, what earlier used to from an expensive perspective, as affordability has increased, internet connectivity has increased, ecosystem is moving well. So I think it's a good to go kind of a thing, phenomenal growth, what we all expect from a gaming industry perspective.
Of course, that gaming rig, that ecosystem is key to all of this, to connect all of those things. So let's just dive into the whole PC rig debate. As more and more people start to sort of get into PC gaming on a more serious level, how do they make the right choices? How do you pick up the right hardware? What do you do? Where do you go? What is the right strategy?
I can kickstart this, right? I think I have an analogy to it, right? I mean, if you look at a gaming rig, if you look at all the potential products that are used in a gaming rig, you'll realize that if CPU is considered the brain of the computer, you'll have components which are considered to be heart of the computer. You'll have components which are in the ecosystem, as Srinivas and Sanjeev said, in the ecosystem, allow you to create the perfect rig which delivers the seamless experience, right? When you look at from storage, let's say, considering that I'm representing Western Digital, I would want to take up storage as a critical component of this ecosystem, right? You will see that in the pro gaming space, or even in the enthusiast gaming space, consumers have constantly recognized how important storage plays a part with regards to your gaming experience. The lag times in the storage, and that's how we are witnessing the adoption or moving from the traditional hard disk drives which were used in the gaming environment to more faster ways of accessing your storage with the means of the SSD product line, right? I mean, you look at Western Digital. For us, the gaming as a segment is so important that we practically created a product line which is dedicated for enhancing the gaming experience for gamers. Our NVMe based WD Black SSD is a revolutionary technology which is designed grounds up, keeping in mind our gamers, right? The portfolio completely offers ultra fast speed and a massive capacity. So speed and capacity, these are really, really important characteristics of a pro gamer, and they become a very, very critical part of the gaming rig, which eventually allows consumers to witness that seamless experience, right? So again, right, the ecosystem around it, and as Srinivas initially said, right, that what is also going to witness a a sea of changes is as the ecosystem partners come together, they are able to deliver more cost-effective and revolutionary products and technologies for the consumers, which help them to adopt the pro gaming a lot more easily.
So Kali just spoke about the heart of the system, the SSD, the storage. It's of course one of the most critical parameters for a PC. Let's just jump on to Sanjeev now, because without those keyboards, without those mice, accessories, you can't game. So probably who better to talk about these things.
As I earlier said, the technology is actually taking us where we want to be. Why I'm saying that? You see, not only PC gaming technologies are changing the scenario, actually the other technologies are also changing the scenario. I mean, say for example, what I am trying to say is, I talked of platform. I mean, I talked of training being one of them. The platforms which are available, say we have Planet 9. Acer has one platform, Planet 9, where you can interact with the gamers, professional gamers. You can take the coaching. These kind of platforms are also coming along with whatever technologies he talked about, which is more to do with PC gaming, right? Since he has already touched upon that, I thought I'll touch on these kind of a technology. Not only that, today we are talking of cafes, which are coming up, which one of the restrictions which I talked about earlier in PC gaming, which was device availability at a cost-effective price. If we are able to actually somehow take care of these cafes, I mean, if we are able to develop in a proper manner, somebody actually looks at. I know one of the startups which is working on that, and BYOD kind of a technology is also available where you bring, because gamers are very sticky about their own devices. They may not have internet penetration available at home. So to beat that, cafes are coming up, which may actually facilitate that you can bring your device, play there, so that they are whatever device they are used to, they are able to use it in their cafe, but they get the connectivity what they want. So those kind of things are also happening. Besides more and more accessories being available, I mean, we have come to a point where for gamers we have come to a say Predator gaming bag. I mean, those kind of facilities also being available. So we have come to a point where each and every aspect of gaming is being looked into. The keyboard, I mean, and the headset, new technologies are being adopted, which are faster and delivering better results. So, I mean, each and every aspect is being, I mean, if you look at Acer, we have come up with Acer Predator headset, Nitro gaming devices, things of that sort. So, not only, in terms of PC gaming, the device accessories are also coming up, which gives you better results. And definitely that is also bringing in more and more interest. That is what I would say. Back to you.
Srinivas will be able to tell us a little more about those accessories because,
Yeah. Thanks, Saurabh. So, just to add to what Khalid and Sanjeev said. So basically, infrastructure in gaming is actually built over a period of time. A gamer actually takes a few years to, choose the right gear, what fits for his gaming. So basically, if let's take an example of a gaming mice. The mice needs to be really comfortable, should be able to really low lags. So that is where we at Logitech has come out with this technology called light speed, right? What does this actually do? It's basically an end-to-end wireless solution which actually reduces latency, right, and improves performance. And that is where actually that is where we play a lot. And every product of what Logitech, what we are doing from a perspective of protocol study, algorithms, every step is simulated and to increase the performance there. So therefore, from our overall infrastructure perspective, I think it's across, whether it's professional, whether it's casual, whether it is enthusiast. So the gamers need to look at what fits in to their needs, and yeah, that's where obviously we play around. And yeah, so
Sort of just a quick comment. One more thought that I wanted to share, right? And then again, based on what Srinivas and Sanjeev also mentioned, a couple of months ago at Western Digital, we ran a survey. It's called the Next Gen Gamer Survey, which basically surveyed quite a lot of gamers across the country to try and understand, how they're seeing gaming as a segment. What are the important areas that we need to look at? It threw a lot of insights across to us, and one of them was, the fact that 57% of the gamers or the respondents believe that slow storage is one of the most critical areas that they go through, and a quantum amount of them talked about how important the consoles are, how important the accessories are, and so on and so forth. When you look at gaming as a segment, right? You see that over the last few years, it has evolved to such a level, right? And the advanced technologies that are to be deployed in gaming as an environment, which could be starting from your graphic cards, your gameplay, your VR devices, your AR devices, and how the evolution of 5G is going to happen. Would probably result in the gaming devices requiring a much more better storage, as well as top grade PC consoles and peripherals, right? I think these all components have to come together. We continuously have to come together in order to help boost the PC gamer experience. And as that PC gamer experience becomes critical, that's where ecosystem partners like us, Western Digital, Acer, Logitech, all of us come together in order to create that environment for the consumer as well. I thought I'll just share that across with you guys. Thank you.
So SSDs are, clearly the new buzzword. People have started appreciating how good they are, how safe they are, how secure they are, and of course how fast they are. And they're the next gen technology. So a couple of questions for you, Khalid, on this, because hard disks have been the go-to standard for a long time. Do you think that technology sort of has reached the peak now, and it's the time of SSDs to sort of take over, and now going forward is going to be all SSDs in the future? And how soon can we get to see affordable SSDs? Because SSDs are still expensive, pricey proposition.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's very very relevant question, and a very in the current day and time, right? I mean, with regards to HDD, I think before I answer this question, I think we need to look at a broader perspective of data, right? And you look at data as such, you've got to start segmenting the data between the big data and the fast data requirements that you have. When you look at from big data perspective, the importance of HDDs will continue to be really, really strong, right? I mean, these are and I think over the last couple of years, predominantly over the last 18 months, we've realized how important data is for us, right? As communities, as organizations, as economies, right? And as countries who have been able to create valuable insights from the data that they gather from their surveillance feeds, were able to probably control the pandemic to a larger, better extent than a lot of other countries who were able to utilize the data and turn that data into insights with regards to their healthcare system, probably were able to react faster and had a faster turnaround times to dealing with the pandemic. So we got to understand that HDDs will continue to be a very, very strong part of managing that data ecosystem. So HDDs are not going anywhere, right? We'll continue to see them in the long term. However, what is also happening is, from fast data perspective, you realize that there are applications which require a much faster reaction time, right? You look at how autonomous cars are being developed, or you look at gaming as a segment, which we are talking about right now. Over there in that segment, you realize the importance of products and devices like SSDs, which allow consumers to experience much faster reaction time to applications, right? So SSDs will continue to form a very, very critical part of that segment, wherein fast data is a lot more stronger play and a requirement. So there's going to be consistent a hybrid between HDDs and SSDs as we see the data ecosystem consistently growing. Now, to answer your question about affordability on SSDs, right? I mean, as the economies of scale on SSDs continue to grow, we have witnessed the SSDs becoming a lot more affordable than what they were a couple of years ago, right? The cost per gigabyte on SSDs is far more better than what it used to be in the past, right? Is it at an optimal level? Is it not at an optimal level? I think that's something that requires a broader discussion. But I believe that as we continue to see a strong adoption in terms of SSDs and the economies of scale of the SSD as a product line continues to grow, we'll continue to witness SSDs becoming a lot more affordable than what they are probably right now. But I see the hybrid use of HDDs and SSDs consistently for long term. And as a parting comment, what I also do believe is it's very important to look at this from a broader perspective. As we continue to create more insights from data using the big data and fast data, the more we will see the importance of data being growing in every segment and in every environment. Back to you, Saurabh. I hope that answers your
It does. Thank you so much. This pricing is very, very critical because India is a very price sensitive market. And, all of you have mentioned that PC gaming is sort of expensive. It's a pricey proposition. So Sanjeev, I quickly want to ask you, is this true? Is PC gaming really, not for everybody because it's so expensive? Or is that just a perception? Is it changing? Your comments on this.
So as far as PC gaming is concerned, the numbers actually tells us that it is on the rise. Yes, I mean, keeping into mind today the way India is per capita income, if we look at, then definitely I would say that positively that it has a potential to grow. Per capita income is increasing, and as it is increasing, your gamers are also numbers are increasing. But we have a huge potential. Being 70% population, which is young population, I think we have a huge potential. So we need to definitely work harder to get each and every aspect of gaming into a chip. That is what is happening actually. If you look at the chip developer, this is what they are doing right now. And you touched upon Evo. You touched upon a few of the technologies. In fact, Khalid also talked about SSD. Right now, it is hybrid. However, once the prices come down, you may not require a hybrid system like 256 SSD you take and 1 TB of storage you take. You may not require that kind of a thing to happen. However, I would look at the potential itself in India. If I look at, definitely we need to tap better technologies by which we are able to make it slightly affordable. And that is why I was talking about cafes. I mean, that is something which I see as a solution where we are able to actually give the device to gamers on a rental basis or a per hour basis or something like that, so that the gamers are able to the real potential gamers are able to actually practice there. So I see a lot of potential that side, and PC gaming is going to be the future, and it is going to increase. I see these cafes. Say in another 2 years' time, you will see a lot many cafes coming up around that. That is what my thought process is. And not only that, see, one of the things which is going to help PC gaming is if you look at the curriculum abroad, people have actually come up with a curriculum with the e-gaming. India is evolving. India adapts slightly slower. I mean, we have adapted so many things today. We have become so open in education. I'm sure this is also going to be one of the agendas with the government, where e-gaming curriculum is devised if that happens, that is also going to boost gaming, and I see it happening shortly. I mean, some of the universities must be working on that possibly, which I'm not aware, but that is going to happen because it has already started happening abroad. So with all that, I see PC gaming has a really bright future, and it is going to explode in coming 2 years' time.
So Srinivas, how relevant and how do the accessories sort of come in to the story, and how relevant they would be in the future? There's no upper ceiling when it comes to those accessories as well. I mean, they're also very, very pricey.
Yeah, so
They could get pricey.
Yeah. The sort of the way we look at this overall industry and this business is basically PC gaming is for actually everyone. It's just a function of whether you are a casual or a enthusiast, or you're a pro. And from keeping that in mind, we at Logitech have looked at the functional needs of these people, of these consumers across, and we have products across, whether it is for casual, whether it is for enthusiasts, and we have a what we call as a pro series for the professional gamers there. So therefore, if you ask me, well, it is there across. People are really looking at it. As I said earlier, people are really spending time with staying at home, what we call as play from home and stream from home. People are streaming, people are playing it. So I think is there across.
So how important are upgrades? How often do you need to upgrade your PC to stay relevant? Of course, it could vary depending upon the technology, but what's the adequate timing to sort of upgrade your PCs if you're a hardcore gamer?
I think if you're a pro and a hardcore gamer, the moment you see that your PC is having a massive lag and delays, the moment your game experience is not as good as it should be, the moment you realize that you're not able to perform to your potential, I think it's a time to upgrade, right? I mean, that's how I look at it, right? It all depends on experience, right? I mean, it all depends on the kind of experience that you want to have from the console or the environment that you've created with regards to the devices or the equipment that you're using.
Right.
I just want to add a point to here what Khalid said. What you call as latency lag. This is the most important thing in PC gaming. Every industry player looks at reducing this lag, this latency, and every millisecond counts for these gamers. And so therefore, anywhere you find that there is a lag, there is a latency, it's time to upgrade actually.
So all said and done, plenty of excitement around PC gaming. The obvious question would be: is India headed in the right direction now?
I mean, I can answer that question, right? I did mention that at the beginning of the talk, right? We're going to witness, and the serious research says that we're going to witness a 40% compound annual growth rate in the next 1 or 2 years in the gaming segment, right? This is contributing the entire gaming segment, which also includes online gaming, mobile gaming, PC gaming as a whole, and PC gaming is a part of it, right? And when you see a market which is witnessing a 40% growth, I think we're poised for a very, very positive outlook with regards to the PC gaming as a market for India.
Add on to Khalid's point. Today, not only we have 88% devices which are being bought more in terms of gaming. So this is one of the largest segments where we see a growth in terms of devices, but also we see that the TAM has increased, which means actually whatever 88%, I mean, it has increased by 100% actually because of work from home and learn from home. So if you look at in past 1 year, what we are talking about is not 88% has actually become double because the TAM has increased. So in terms of devices, there is a 4-time growth. Let me put it this way. So if we are talking of this kind of a growth, it is so basically that shows that people have become more serious about gaming. because it has also got related to earning right today, and that is the major change when we talk of job being created and job being job being training people, and platforms are available where you can do that, like MPL has started. In fact, so much of ads which were being given. I talked about Planet 9, which is Acer platform, where you can get in touch. If these kind of things are happening, that is actually going to explode the market. We are already on 4 times 100% growth of gaming devices, and 100% TAM increase. So we are talking of from last year to this year 4 times, actually speaking.
No, one more thing that I wanted to add, Saurabh, before I let Srinivas come in, right? And this basically just talks about and Sanjay rightly said, right? He talked about the Cloud9. I want to tell you about how ecosystem partners, how brands like ourselves are actually seriously, also becoming a catalyst towards this growth. Such exciting is this segment that Western Digital decided to have its own gaming cup. It's called the WD Black Cup, in which we basically invite pro gamers to participate. And we just concluded the first Western Digital Black Cup, and what a phenomenal engagement that we had, not just from pro gamers, but from also casual and enthusiast gamers. It was millions and millions of consumers that we were able to reach out. So I think there's a lot more to offer when it comes to this segment, and it's an exciting segment to be in.
I just want to add to what Khalid and Sanjeev said here. And this is a very interesting point what I want to make. Today, from a perspective of the TAM, what Sanjeev said, total addressable market and all. Today, it's one of the research reports, not in India, but one of the other South Asian countries. 35% of the gamers are female gamers. And India is also mirroring that. So therefore, today, a lot of gamers, female gamers are getting attracted to this, and a lot of these female gamers are getting hooked on to this game. So obviously, we at Logitech have looked at it, and we have brought in a lot of our peripherals which attract to this segment. So therefore, it is no longer a male-dominated, male kind of a sport or an industry. Females are jumping into it, and that's a very, very interesting data point and interesting perspective. What we look forward and really looking up, which will actually drive the industry towards further growth rates of what Khalid said of 40% or beyond that.
Anything else? Any parting comments you want to make? Because it's just been so insightful to have you. Just so much information and so much excitement around PC gaming. It's just remarkable. Thank you all for joining us, for your time. It was lovely speaking to you guys.
Thank you so much to everyone. Now, from industry stalwarts, we now move on to the gamers. It's time for our breakout session where gamers talk about their experiences and journey in the gaming sector. Please welcome 𝗚្��𝗺𝗶𝗁, also known as Techno Gamers.
स्टार्टिंग में जब मैं स्ट्रीमिंग, पहले मैं वीडियोस डालता था नॉर्मली यूट्यूब पे, बट फिर जब पबजी आई तो बहुत से लोगों ने मुझे कमेंट करा कि आप इस गेम को लाइव आके खेलो। मैंने ये चीज देखी थी कि यूट्यूब पे कंसिस्टेंसी बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है, क्योंकि जिन लोगों ने हमें सब्सक्राइब करा है तो हमारी भी एक रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है कि उन्हें एक वीडियो देनी है, इसीलिए उन्होंने हमें सब्सक्राइब करा। उनके पास वो नोटिफिकेशन जाना चाहिए डेली जिसका वो वेट कर रहे हैं। Hey, what's up guys? I'm 𝗚្��𝗺𝗶𝗁 from Techno Gamers. मैं भी आप लोग की तरह एक नॉर्मल सा लड़का हूँ, बट हाँ, मैं गेमिंग का बहुत ज्यादा शौकीन हूँ। गेमिंग मेरा पैशन है जिसे मैं फॉलो करता आ रहा हूँ और फॉलो करते रहूंगा। स्टार्टिंग में जब मैं स्ट्रीमिंग, पहले मैं वीडियोस डालता था नॉर्मली यूट्यूब पे, बट फिर जब पबजी आई तो बहुत से लोगों ने मुझे कमेंट करा कि आप इस गेम को लाइव आके खेलो, कि लाइव में क्या रहता है कि लाइव चैट होता है, नॉर्मल बात चलती है। तो फिर मैंने लाइव स्ट्रीमिंग स्टार्ट करी। उस टाइम पे काफी कम लोग मुझे देखने आते थे, बट हाँ, जैसे जैसे मैं स्ट्रीम करता रहा, धीरे धीरे वॉचिंग भी बढ़ती रही, ऑडियंस भी बढ़ती रही, काफी अच्छा सपोर्ट आया लोगों का। और मैंने भी अपने उन कमेंट्स को, उन चैट्स को रीड करके अपनी भी क्वालिटी काफी ज्यादा इंप्रूव करी, और आज आपके सामने। स्टार्टिंग में जब मैंने गेम खेलना स्टार्ट करा था तो ऐसी किसी का भी फोन मेरे को अगर मिल जाता था, उस टाइम पे नोकिया वाले जो फोन चलते थे बटन वाले, किसी का भी फोन मिल जाता था, उसमें पहले गेम ढूंढता था। तो उसमें नॉर्मली स्नेक वाला गेम रहता था और बाउंस रहता था, उसमें रेड कलर की बॉल होती थी, एडवेंचर टाइप होता था थोड़ा सा। तो वो ऐसे गेम है जिसे मैंने शुरुआत में खेला था। फिर उसके बाद मेरे को एक टीवी वाला जो गेम होता है नॉर्मल पुराना कंसोल था, उसमें कैसेट्स लगती थी, वो गेम मैंने खेलना स्टार्ट करी। उसमें जो मैं गेम खेलता था वो एक टाइप से कह सकते हो कि मैं बहुत ज्यादा खेलता था। जब भी मेरे को फ्री टाइम मिला और देखा कि घर वाले नहीं है तो बस खेलना स्टार्ट। और उसमें जो मैं गेम खेलता था कॉन्ट्रा एंड मारियो, स्नो ब्रदर्स मेरी फेवरेट थी, क्योंकि हम दोनों भाई साथ में खेलते थे और उसके 50 लेवल होते थे, डेली कंप्लीट करते थे। वो कह सकते हो कि हाँ, वो मेरी फेवरेट गेम थी फर्स्ट। गेमिंग स्क्रीन एक गेम प्ले वीडियो में इसलिए इंपॉर्टेंट है ताकि जो सामने वाली ऑडियंस हमारी वीडियो देखने आई है उसको ऐसा फील होए कि वो गेम देखने नहीं आया, गेम खेलने आया। उसे ऐसे फील होनी चाहिए कि हाँ, वो खुद उस गेम को खेल रहा है। और गेम स्क्रीन के साथ साथ गेम का साउंड भी बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है, क्योंकि क्या होता है कि जब हम उस पर कमेंट्री करते हैं तो कहीं ना कहीं ऐसा होता है कि गेम का भी साउंड बहुत ज्यादा हो रहा है, अपनी कमेंट्री का साउंड भी बहुत ज्यादा है और दोनों कोलैप्स कर रहे हैं, तो ना वो वाला साउंड सही से आएगा ना मेरा साउंड सही से जाएगा। तो दोनों का साउंड मिक्सिंग भी बहुत ज्यादा सही होगी तो और ज्यादा बेटर रहता है, इससे कि सामने वाली ऑडियंस को ना पूरी वैसी फील आती है कि वो खुद उस गेम को खेल रहे हैं। तो अगर ऐसी फील जाएगी ऑडियंस तक तो वो पूरा उसमें घुस जाएंगे कि हाँ, अब नहीं छोड़नी है, वीडियो पूरी देखनी है। आइडियल गेमिंग स्क्रीन एक प्लेयर के लिए ऐसी होनी चाहिए कि पहली चीज उसका रेजोल्यूशन काफी ज्यादा सही होना चाहिए, मतलब 8K हो, 4K हो तो भी बहुत ज्यादा बढ़िया है। एक अच्छा रिफ्रेश रेट वाला मॉनिटर होना चाहिए, एमएस भी उसके काफी ज्यादा अच्छे होने चाहिए, मतलब एकदम लो एमएस हो तो बहुत ज्यादा एकदम रियल टाइम चले, काफी ज्यादा बेटर रहता है। और सबसे मेन चीज अगर हम बात करें, हम पूरा पूरा दिन गेम खेलते हैं, क्योंकि एक नॉर्मल गेमर है 1-2 घंटे गेम नहीं खेलता, एटलीस्ट 4 घंटे वो दिन में गेम खेलेगा ही। तो क्या होता है कि अगर हम ज्यादा देर गेम खेलते हैं उसमें ब्राइटनेस भी ज्यादा रहती है, तो ऐसे क्या आंखों पे लोड पड़ता है, और आंखों पे लोड पड़ेगा तो फिर सर दर्द और ऐसी प्रॉब्लम ना हो। तो इसलिए उस मॉनिटर में, उस स्क्रीन में कुछ ऐसा फंक्शन हो कि बस हाँ, थोड़ा डार्क मोड हो, नाइट मोड हो, जिससे ऐसी मतलब कि थोड़ा लाइट हो जाए कलर की आंखों पे वेट ना पड़े। तो मेरा एक दिन का अगर आप स्ट्रीमिंग टाइम देखोगे कि मैं कितनी देर गेम खेलता हूँ, कितनी देर लाइव स्ट्रीम करता हूँ, तो टोटल मैं आपको बताता हूँ कि मैं कितनी देर गेम खेलता हूँ, कितना टाइम मैं एडिटिंग को देता हूँ और क्या टाइम मैं निकालता हूँ बाकी अपनी चीजों के लिए। तो जब मैं सुबह उठता हूँ सबसे पहले थोड़ी देर एक्सरसाइज कर लेता हूँ ताकि बॉडी पूरी खुल जाए। फिर उसके बाद अपना फ्रेश हुए, अपना ब्रेकफास्ट करा और उसके बाद मैं थोड़ा सा रिसर्च करने बैठ जाता हूँ कि आज मुझे क्या कंटेंट बनाना चाहिए, और जो मैंने वीडियोस डाली है मैं उसका फीडबैक चेक करने लग जाता हूँ कमेंट्स के थ्रू कि हाँ, ऑडियंस को वो वीडियो कैसी लगी, क्योंकि वो देखना बहुत ज्यादा जरूरी है, जिससे हमें पता चल पाए कि जो हम काम कर रहे हैं ऑडियंस को पसंद आ भी रहा है या फिर नहीं। और अगर वो कुछ नया देखना चाहते हैं तो क्या देखना चाहते हैं, तो उन सब चीजों पे मैं पहले रिसर्च कर लेता हूँ। फिर मैं उस हिसाब से, मेरे को पूरे डे का आइडिया लग जाता है कि हाँ, आज मुझे क्या क्या रिकॉर्ड करना है और क्या क्या मुझे वीडियो बनानी है। तो उस हिसाब से मेरा पूरा डे चलता है कि एक टाइम टेबल फिक्स हो जाता है, हाँ, अब इतनी देर में मेरी वाली वीडियो बन जाएगी, फिर उसके बाद मैं ऐसे खाना खा लूंगा। तो ऐसा होता है कि कभी कभार खाना खाने में लेट भी हो जाता है, क्योंकि थोड़ी देर तक रिसर्च चल जाती है। फिर ऐसा होता है जो वीडियो बनाने बैठते हो वीडियो खराब हो जाती है, कभी कभार रिकॉर्ड नहीं हुई, कभी कभार ऐसे चांसेस होते हैं कि छोटे मोटे इशू आ जाए, जैसे खाने के मतलब लंच डिनर थोड़ा बहुत लेट या फिर स्किप भी करना पड़ जाता है कभी कभार। तो ऐसा कभी कभार होता है, बट हाँ, एक टाइम टेबल उस हिसाब से सेट हो जाता है कि इतने मतलब कि 3 से 4 बजे तक मैं अपना वीडियो रिकॉर्ड करूंगा, फिर खाना खा लूंगा, फिर ऐसे 6 से 8 बजे तक एडिट करूंगा, फिर थोड़ा फ्री टाइम बचेगा तो कुछ भी कर सकता हूँ, अपने फ्रेंड्स के साथ गेम खेल सकता हूँ या फिर थोड़ा चिल कर सकता हूँ, मूवी देख सकता हूँ, कुछ भी। बाकी 10 बजे के बाद अपना थंबनेल बनाया, वीडियो अपलोड, सो गए, फिर अगले दिन सेम चीज रिपीट। गेमिंग की अगर आप बात करें मोटिवेशन और इंस्पिरेशन की, तो काफी सारे जो फॉरेन के यूट्यूबर्स थे और इंडियन यूट्यूबर्स भी थे, उनको मैंने बहुत पहले देखा और फिर मेरे को लगा कि हाँ, मुझे भी इन्हीं की तरह बनना है, क्योंकि गेमिंग मेरा प्रॉपर पैशन था, तो मुझे इतना पता था गेमिंग मुझे जाना ही जाना है। फिर साथ ही मेरे भाई का भी सपोर्ट मुझे मिला कि मैं पहले छुप के वीडियोस डाली थी अपने भाई से भी, बट उसने वो देख ली, फिर उसने को उसके बारे में बताया कि हाँ, जो तू कर रहा है ठीक है, बट पढ़ाई के साथ साथ ये भी अपना करते रहे, बेटर रहेगा। तो वहां से मैंने गेमिंग स्टार्ट करी, बट फिर मैंने जैसे देखा कि जैसे टेक्निकल गुरुजी है, प्यूडीपाई है, ये रेगुलर वीडियोस अपलोड करते हैं, मतलब हर दिन वीडियो अपलोड करते हैं और इतने सालों से करते आ रहे हैं। तो मैंने ये चीज देखी थी कि यूट्यूब पे कंसिस्टेंसी बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है, क्योंकि जिन लोगों ने हमें सब्सक्राइब करा है तो हमारी भी एक रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है कि उन्हें एक वीडियो देनी है, इसीलिए उन्होंने हमें सब्सक्राइब करा है, उनके पास वो नोटिफिकेशन जाना चाहिए डेली जिसका वो वेट कर रहे हैं। तो वो चीज मैंने ध्यान में रखी और ऐसा सेटअप मतलब कि एक दिमाग में बैठा लिया कि हाँ मुझे अब वीडियोस डालनी है। वीकली मैंने सोचा था कि पहले हर दिन एक पे एक वीडियो जाए, जो कि जाती है, बट कभी कभार ऐसा होता है कि ना जाए। तो इतना एवरेज है कि हफ्ते में 5 वीडियो एटलीस्ट डालता ही हूँ। आजकल जो गेम ट्रेंड कर रहे हैं अपने इंडिया की अगर मैं बात करूं तो सबसे ज्यादा जो ट्रेंड कर रही है वो है फ्री फायर, माइनक्राफ्ट, GTA 5 एंड वैलोरेंट। पीसी गेम्स में जो सबसे ज्यादा ट्रेंड कर रही है वो वैलोरेंट ही है। बाकी हाँ GTA 5 कुछ कुछ क्रिएटर्स खेलने, मैं भी काफी ज्यादा GTA 5 खेलता हूँ, वीकली मेरा रहता है कि एक वीडियो डालू। और जो मोबाइल गेमर्स हैं वो सबसे ज्यादा इस टाइम पे फ्री फायर खेल रहे हैं, और साथ ही BGMI भी आ गई है, तो मोबाइल प्लेयर्स वहां पर भी शिफ्ट हो रहे हैं। तो यही गेम्स है जो कि बहुत ज्यादा ट्रेंड कर रहे हैं, और मेरे को ऐसा लगता है कि माइनक्राफ्ट है जो इन सबके भी ऊपर अभी जाने वाली है। अगर बात करें कि इंडिया में गेमिंग इतना ज्यादा बूस्ट कैसे हुआ, तो उसका रीजन यही है कि हम में से मैक्सिमम ऑडियंस के पास इंडिया में एक मोबाइल फोन है। तो पीसी गेम जब तक मोबाइल फोन नहीं था, और मोबाइल फोन आया कैसे, जब जियो आया तो सबने मोबाइल खरीदे। उस टाइम पे बहुत सारे स्मार्टफोन इंडिया में बिके थे, जिससे कि सबके पास एक मोबाइल पहुंच गया। फिर ऐसे पबजी और फ्री फायर जैसे गेम्स आए जो कि टूर्नामेंट भी लेकर आए, तो उस चीज को देखकर बहुत ज्यादा ही मतलब अच्छा खासा बूस्ट मिला इंडिया में गेमिंग कम्युनिटी को, क्योंकि जो टूर्नामेंट्स वो करवा रहे थे उस टूर्नामेंट से लोगों का नाम बन रहा था, ऐसे टूर्नामेंट जीत रहे हैं, न्यूज में आ रहे हैं। जो पेरेंट्स थे प्लेयर्स के, उन्होंने ये चीज फोकस करी कि हाँ गेमिंग को भी हम लोग एक करियर बना सकते हैं, वो लोग अगर जीत रहे हैं तो हमारे बच्चे भी जीतेंगे। तो यही सोच के पेरेंट्स ने कुछ ना कुछ तो मतलब वो अपने बच्चों को सपोर्ट करा, जिस वजह से आज गेमिंग इतने ज्यादा लेवल पे है, क्योंकि इतने सारे लोग गेम्स खेल रहे हैं। जब भी कोई टूर्नामेंट होता है तो उसमें से लाखों की रजिस्ट्रेशन जाती है, जिससे ये पता चलता है कि हाँ मतलब गेमिंग इस टाइम पे बहुत ज्यादा पेरेंट्स की तरफ से भी सपोर्ट हो रहा है, और बहुत ज्यादा ये बूस्ट हो चुका है। अगर मैं एक एपिक मोमेंट की बात करूं अपने पूरी गेमिंग लाइफ में, तो वैसे बहुत सारे एपिक मोमेंट्स हुए हैं। माइनक्राफ्ट में हुआ है, GTA 5 में हुआ है, वैलोरेंट में हुआ है, और जो सबसे ज्यादा तगड़ा था जिसपे जो ऑडियंस है वो भी काफी ज्यादा हैरान हो गई थी, और मैं खुद हैरान हो गया था कि ये कैसे हो गया, तो वो है एक पबजी का मोमेंट, जिसमें मैं सोलो और स्क्वाड खेल रहा था। मतलब मैं अकेला था और सामने जो टीम्स है वो 4-4 है। तो उसी सिचुएशन में क्या हुआ कि मैं एक जगह उतरा जहां पर मेरे को एक नॉर्मल सी गन मिली M16A4, जो कि बर्स्ट मोड पे चलती है। बट तभी सामने चार या 3 लोग आ गए, मतलब एक स्क्वाड आ गई जिन पे अच्छी खासी गन थी, M416, M762 बैरल, और वो सीधा मेरे ऊपर अटैक करने आ रही। बट उस सिचुएशन में मैंने पता नहीं कैसे उस बर्स्ट मोड वाली गन को ऐसे टैप कर करके फुल ऑटो पे चला के जितने एनिमीज थे उनको किल कर दिया। तो काफी ज्यादा मतलब मैंने फ्रेंड्स को भी दिखाया तो वो भी हैरान हो गए थे कि हाँ ये कैसे हो सकता है, तू इस गन का गॉड है। और काफी ज्यादा ऑडियंस का भी हैरान वाला पूरा वो आया था रिएक्शन। तो अगर हम बात करें फ्यूचर प्रेडिक्शन की कि कौन सी गेम्स नेक्स्ट ईयर ट्रेंड करने वाले, तो आपने देखा होगा लास्ट ईयर GTA 5 PUBG बहुत ज्यादा ट्रेंड कर रही थी, बट अनफॉर्चुनेटली वो बैन हो गई। और इस ईयर अगर हम बात करें तो माइनक्राफ्ट एंड फ्री फायर सबसे ज्यादा ट्रेंड कर रही है, और पीसी गेम्स में वैलोरेंट बहुत ज्यादा ट्रेंड कर रही है। बट मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि नेक्स्ट ईयर अगर लीग ऑफ लीजेंड्स या डोटा इंडिया में टूर्नामेंट्स लेकर आए, तो वो हो सकता है कि इंडिया की भी सबसे ज्यादा ट्रेंडिंग गेम बन सकते हैं। बट ये है कि गेम बहुत अच्छी है बट टूर्नामेंट्स नहीं हो रहे, तो अगर प्लेयर्स खेलेंगे और प्रो बन जाएंगे तो उनका उतना कोई फायदा नहीं है, इसलिए वो लोग उस पर नहीं जा रहे हैं। बट अगर वो आते हैं टूर्नामेंट्स लेके तो बहुत ज्यादा ट्रेंड करेगी। और तीसरी गेम जो मुझे लगता है कि ट्रेंड कर सकती है वो है रोब्लॉक्स। रोब्लॉक्स अदर कंट्रीज में मतलब फॉरेन कंट्रीज में बहुत ज्यादा चलती है, तो हो सकता है कि अगर रोब्लॉक्स जो
हेलो
क्रिएटर्स हैं खेलना
हेलो हेलो
स्टार्ट करें तो वो भी इंडिया में
हेलो
मतलब बहुत, क्योंकि रोब्लॉक्स एक ऐसा गेम है जो हम स्मार्टफोन पे भी खेल सकते हैं, पीसी पे भी खेल सकते हैं और साथ में खेल सकते हैं। तो मतलब हर प्लेटफॉर्म पे अवेलेबल है, और इतना ज्यादा उसके लिए हाई एंड पीसी भी नहीं चाहिए। तो अगर आती है तो वो
हेलो
ट्रेंड
हेलो हेलो हेलो
बहुत ज्यादा।
हेलो
तो अगर मैं एक मैसेज देना चाहूँ अपकमिंग गेमर्स को जो कि अभी यूट्यूब पे चैनल स्टार्ट कर रहे हैं या फिर एक प्रोफेशनल गेमर बनना चाहते हैं, तो सबसे पहले हमें ये ध्यान रखना है कि अगर हम गेमिंग में आ रहे हैं तो हमें उसके लिए अपनी पढ़ाई नहीं छोड़नी, दोनों चीज को हमें साथ के साथ लेके चलना है। एक परफेक्ट टाइम टेबल बन जाएगा ना कि हम इतनी देर तक पढ़ लेते हैं और इतनी देर तक होमवर्क कंप्लीट कर लेते हैं, तो 5 घंटे हम लोग ऐसे मतलब दिन में निकाल लोगे, 5 घंटे फुल मैक्स है, बट अगर आप मिनिमम 2 घंटे भी निकाल लोगे तो बहुत सही है। 2 घंटे में आप सब कुछ कर सकते हो, ऐसे रिकॉर्ड कर लो, नेक्स्ट डे उसे एडिट करके डाल दो, तो आपका वो मतलब देख के चलना है, दोनों को बैलेंस करके चलना है। सेकंड चीज जो आज के टाइम पे बहुत ज्यादा हो रही है कि सब लोग आते हैं, चैनल बनाते हैं, एक वीडियो डालते हैं और उसी के पीछे लगे रहते हैं उसके प्रमोशन पे कि अब इसका प्रमोशन होता है। एक वीडियो डाली, अब एक हफ्ते तक उसका प्रमोशन करेंगे। उससे बढ़िया हम लोग प्रमोशन करने की जगह हल्का फुल्का शेयर करके अपने फ्रेंड्स को एक नई वीडियो बनाने में काम दे दे। मतलब ज्यादा आप कंटेंट डालोगे, सीधी बात है, ज्यादा ऑडियंस आएगी आपके पास, ज्यादा अपनी ही क्वालिटी इंप्रूव होगी बार बार वीडियो बनाने में, कुछ अलग। तो इससे बढ़िया प्रमोशन के पीछे बिल्कुल नहीं भागना, बाकी कंटेंट पे फोकस करना है। और थर्ड चीज, हार नहीं माननी, वीडियोस रेगुलर डालते रहनी है। एक परफेक्ट टाइम बनाना है कि हम लोग हफ्ते में 7 वीडियो डाल रहे हैं या फिर हफ्ते में 1 वीडियो डाल रहे हैं, तो कंसिस्टेंसी यूट्यूब पे बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है। तो हाँ, बस इसी में लगे रहना है। और सबसे मेन चीज, आपको ट्रेंडिंग गेम फॉलो करनी है। जो मतलब ऐसा जरूरी नहीं है ट्रेंडिंग गेम फॉलो करनी है, बट हाँ, ट्रेंडिंग गेम फॉलो करोगे तो चांसेस ज्यादा है, क्योंकि गेम ट्रेंडिंग इसलिए क्योंकि लोग उसे खेल रहे हैं, बहुत ज्यादा देख रहे हैं, खेल रहे हैं। तो अगर आप भी उस चीज में आओगे तो बहुत ज्यादा बेटर रहेगा, आपको भी लोग देखना पसंद करेंगे। और उसमें अगर हम लोग कुछ यूनिक कंटेंट बना दे तो और ज्यादा बेटर रहेगा। तो ये 3 चीजें जो अगर आप फॉलो कर लोगे तो इजिली आप ग्रो कर सकते हो और सक्सेस हो जाओगे।
Thank you so much, Ujjwal. Now we switch our focus towards enhancing the gamer's experience. In our next session, titled User Experience and the Need for Better VFX, we will explore how important a role user experience and good visual effects play. For this, please welcome JP Reddy, VP Business Development on Monkey, Vishnu Murthy, Studio Head and Art Director, Gamitronics, Viren Ghosh, Country Head, Technicolor, Jan Garen, Country Head and Director, Ecole Intuit Lab, and Abhiral Bansali, Product and Head, TV, LG Electronics, India. To moderate this session, we have Anushri Bhattacharya, Editor, Brand and Marketing, FE.com. Over to you, Anushri.
Hi everyone.
Hey,
So
Anushri.
hi. So I believe everyone has joined, including Yan. Hi. Uh, Sorry, I was reading a lot about the need for good VFX and what is the difference it makes. And I read about games are not only about chasing a goal. A significant chunk of the game experience happen outside of the moment to moment gameplay, and players' expectations have risen everywhere. And this is also called in a way around game experience, which includes which is a combination of in-game experience also. So basically the idea is to give a cohesive experience. So the first question that I would like to ask to JP is, at Born Monkey, how would you define an around game experience?
Right. User experience plays a very key role in any game, like whether it's a casual or hyper casual or any category. So what game developers think about this user experience is they just neglect it. They just don't care what is the user experience and all. But if you can see in AAA game space, where there is a AAA studio called CD Project Red, like who developed a game called Cyberpunk, which took 6 years of the development time, high production cost, high marketing budget, and they also onboarded Keanu Reeves as their brand ambassador for that game. But the game fails to match the expectations of the customers, the players. So why is this? Because the user experience is really bad. Elon Musk also tweeted regarding this because the user experience he doesn't like the game. So spending this whole budget making it AAA game, they just need to like fix this user experience right. So if they do that right, the marketing budget will be lower, and the organic traffic will be high, and the retention will be high.
Understood. The next question is to Vishnu Murthy. Vishnu, I was reading about the kind of games you were making, and I remember an article in particular about Speedy Gun Savage, which was supposed to be launched early this year. Has that been launched? How has been the response? Additional question is, how much time did it actually go into creating the game, and especially when it comes to experience around the game?
Sure. So nice to meet you all. And yeah, so yeah, Speedy Gun Savage, it's out in the early access right as of now. Like it's probably we are unfortunately there is a fire accident happened in the office. It's not inside our office; it's in the same tower. So that's the reason. Couple of some other we moved to the launch date to the September, and yeah, of course it took around about a year to develop this game, and around 48 people in and out approximately. And it's going as of now. It's on live Vive and Oculus, and the PlayStation and Quest are ready, and those are in the review. So once review are approved, and then we can go out for the full release and everything. But we wanted to go everything together in one shot, so which is planned on September. So and definitely it's all about VR experience. Like we want to release in every VR platform. So so yeah, especially a game for gamers. So we target it globally, and a pretty hardcore game. Like so like all the fighting, everything. The VR experience is pretty. It came out really good in terms of. Yeah, in fact, the early access feedback came pretty good. It's like 10 out of 8 out of 10. The experience, like people are liking it, and we personally receiving a lot of emails also saying that it's coming out really fantastic in terms of visual effects, and other the look and feel of game experience as well. And yeah, looking really positive, and the positive feedback, everything making us more excited to go for a full release, which will happen in September.
Sure. So, Viren, I have a question. I know your set of companies are known for its animation work, right? And Jungle Book was one of them, which was talked about. And of course, it had brilliant graphics and animation. When how do you bring the same experience in games when you develop these games? And what kind of international experience do you try to incorporate in these games?
Thank you very much. Great to be on this panel with. I'm a person who comes from many years in brand marketing. I come from creating products. In the entertainment world, we create original IP. It all is about what connects with consumers, and you're going to hear that. I think we have even a person from the marketing field coming shortly. So we are makers. Technicolor is a 105-year-old company. We've been there to create content for people, and people have changed over 105 years. We even change every 5 years or 2 years or 3 years. And being a wind in the sails of publishers, being who want to create franchises. Jungle Book was one of our 4 Oscars that we won for visual effects. Okay, so that's just one of that story. And I think the process of creating the art is ubiquitous. The stories are written differently for television and games, and I think Vishnu spoke of AR, VR. We've done 115 projects in AR and VR actually, and mostly for a very large international. And it's still not there, right? I mean, the device is yet to become ubiquitous. I think this is going to become huge in the future in healthcare, in entertainment, in education, in R&D, and so on and so forth. So we actually are just an engine room. And what we do is that we are driven by an artist-first culture, because we believe that while the gameplay will, have its own rollout, we've learned from our clients.
So if you look at the games that we've kind of worked on, I'll just give you a sample, right? Hitman for IO Interactive, Call of Duty for Activision, Tomb Raider for Crystal Dynamics. We've done the EA FIFA game now for 11 years, by the way. We've done all of the art and animation for the FIFA game for 11 years, okay? Most people who are going to be on this conference in the whole day today, this summit would have played the FIFA game at one time or the other, they would have played it, right? I just want to talk a little bit about Ubisoft, or who everyone knows for Assassin's Creed, but on Starlink, which wasn't such a big hit. We actually worked with the design and the development here in Bengaluru in Technicolor, where we actually came in to work with Ubisoft on, and I think that's really the exciting end for artists, right? To be involved in the major part with the initial design and the concept and the artwork, and to create the characters and the in-game creatures and the sets and the environments and the pre-rendered cinematics, to even set the context of what is going. That is really the holy grail of what you want to do, where you're creating the scope and the definition. And I believe that our movie industry, if they did the same rigor, would have had many more hits. Although we make the largest number of movies in the world, they do not have the development culture that you see in games or in large productions like in animation and visual effects. Because here, for example, if you take a game like the one I just took the example of Starlink, right? You have just to begin with, you create like 26 minutes of a pre-rendered world in which you have 25 characters, 12 sets, 12 spaceships, multiple props, 200 VFX shots, just to like make that beginning story. So that is the rigor that goes into. That's what we're talking about when we talk of user experience. And like anything, you don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work. We helped to incubate the Rockstar studio in India. We started with 40 people, and when they took over and went on their own, they're now something like 600 people. At the time we transitioned to them, there were 450 people, and they still give work back to us, right? So this is partnership. It happens in a collaboration. Art is a collaborative space. It's a team sport, right? So this is like you have the IPL, right? Or you got the IGS today. We are a team sport. Somebody creates those. India is really good at creating the models. We're very, very strong. We're becoming the world's most amazing place to create the models. And that's really the heart of where you create all the assets that get used for time immemorial, right? And as software and hardware develop. And so, the model design itself is going to give this feel of and the granularity that you require to make a very, very successful game. So from the heavy games I talked about, we even work on much lighter games, right? We've done preschool stuff. We work on Barbie, for example, right? We've done a Barbie doll version of the game. So this is a phenomenal for an artist to go across it and to work with the Final Fantasy director who came to Bangalore. He only spoke Japanese, okay? And briefed us on a game called Bravely Default. So we had translators, we had a video camera to keep looking at his brief again. Art is what actually makes something really, really engaging, right? And Anushri, you go to a mall, right? How do you get into that shop? Because you look at the shop window, right? If that art didn't get you, you wouldn't have gone there. And then the rest of it is how you take it from there to the next step. So I'll end by just saying that today's world is about taking something and artistically making it $1 million idea. And that's really, I think, the business that all of us are in. And it's this world of bits and bytes. And what are viewers looking at? We just heard one of the gamers talk, right? And between every one of these, you have this fantastic thing of gamers speaking. And it's important for us to know them. Like, how do we know what story we should create for them? How do we know what connects with them today? Colors make it different. Culture makes it different. It has to hit the spot aesthetically and viably, right? I mean, Vishnu spoke of someone who worked a long, long time on something and it didn't work out. So you need to figure out this balance between creativity and viability. It's very, very important in the scheme of things. I'll pause here to just, but that's my kickoff kind of story. It's VFX is a set of processes, by the way. To make one frame of VFX, there are 12 different processes in it. So modeling is, like sculpting, and texturing is like painting, and rigging is like math and anatomy, and animation is like acting, and lighting is like photography, and rendering, and I can go on. I'm not giving you a master class here, so I'll stop.
Thank you, Biren. It's more of e-tailing these days than going to offline retailers. However, yeah, art do make a lot of difference. I'll first go to Abural and then come to Yan. Abural, these are the guys who are creating, and like Biren said, color, the entire experience make a lot of difference, especially in the gaming world. When you at the OLED TV that you have designed, how would you put will probably play a perfect role in bringing their story alive on the screen? As for Yen, the question is, you are creating new age designers, right? So how do you train them?
Very good question. Thank you for asking. So first of all, I would like to say that École Intuit Lab is a school of design. This is the DNA of the school, is really design. Gaming came a bit later, actually, and we've decided to go with gaming because we believe that design should be at the core of gaming and not technicalities or even software, for example. This is exactly how we built our curriculum. So we did that in collaboration with Ubisoft to make sure that we were at par with the needs of the industry. And because our students are trained for AAA, they're also ready for indie games, for example. And some of our students are working for indie games, actually. What we want to make sure our students understand is a game is not the product of a software. And believe it or not, but many students come to us say, okay, which software should I learn to make a fantastic game? And we have to erase everything that they have in mind, saying this is not what makes the quality of a game. I always give them the same example. I say, for example, you read Harry Potter. You love Harry Potter. Did you ask anyone which software she used to write the book? Or was it done on a typewriter? No, you did not do that. The idea is not coming from the software. The user experience that the students are going to develop in a game comes from their brain. Really, that's their capacity of putting themselves in the shoes of a gamer first, and then the intelligence to make the desire that any gamer can have a reality first, and finding the shortest way to bring them there. I'll give you an example. The first game I bought, I was quite young. It was called Defender of the Crown. It was on the Atari at that time. I bought it was a floppy disk. I bought my game. There was a manual to read. It was big like that. I'm not joking. I was so lazy, I didn't want to read the things. I never understood anything about the game. I never played it. I just opened the first page. It was very beautiful. I never played the game because at that time there was no user experience per se. Okay, if you do that nowadays, nobody will play your game. People download the game. They want to be able to be inside again within 3 minutes max. So the user experience has to be designed in a way that immediately they understand what is the general goal of the game, obviously, how to play it, how to go from level to level, etc. If they don't understand that immediately, if they have to read something, go through manuals or whatever, they will just download another game, as simple as that. So this is really, really what we try to inculcate to our students and say, okay, start with a great idea, something exciting. Take your gamer by the hand so they will have a fantastic experience, an exciting one during the game.
Sure. Abhinay, to you, like I said, the last point is you. It's the product that takes all these games to the users, right? So, the important role of the product and, how do you ensure that it's the best experience that you give to the user?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And thanks, Anushri, for having me on the panel discussion. This is a very relevant question, especially at the time when we are seeing gaming as a industry or gaming as a genre is increasing many folds, and we are seeing gaming as a genre increasing in India also. In fact, I was reading an article some time back saying that gaming as an industry or genre is poised to be bigger than entertainment and sports together. So that is how the gaming industry is growing, and we being an important part of the gaming ecosystem, we know that. So LG has always been at the forefront of innovation, and we do a lot of innovation, keeping the trends, keeping the consumers' need in mind. And we are fully aware of the fact that gaming is all about visuals and immersive experience. Immersive experience in the sense that you should have good picture, good sound, so that gamers can feel that they are really at the center of the action, the center of the game which they are playing. And it is here where LG OLED stands out and deliver unique gaming experience with a unique technology called self-lighting pixels. So like on the other televisions where we have backlight source, LG OLED TV pixels are self-light, and we have 8.3 million pixels which can turn on and turn off, which gives a gamer a good experience, and it delivers deeper blacks. It also gives high contrast ratio. The colors are more vivid, the colors are more rich, right? So those are some of the advantages of OLED TV. When we compare OLED with ordinary screens which gamers play at times, or this other screens which are available for gaming, the OLED experience can go unreal level, because in the gaming content there are frames rate, and at times when we play games there are different frame rates which goes, and if TV is unable to, or any screen which is unable to handle those kind of frame rates, you get a lot of tearing images, a lot of ghost images. So LG OLED is one device, is one screen which supports VRR, variable refresh rates, ALM, auto low latency mode, and is certified by 2.1 channel HDMI, which help reduce and take care of all these issues of motion blur, ghost images, and tearing, and all those things. One unique advantage, Anushri, with OLED is that it has got the low input lag. So when I say low input lag, it has got incredibly low 1 millisecond response time. This means that when I or somebody is a gamer plays and they press some button on controller or keyboard, the action appearing on the screen on the screen is instant. So that's the kind of response that LG OLED has got. It has got 1 millisecond response time, which gives gamer a vital edge over the opponents which he is playing, and he has a better chance to win when he's playing it on a better screen like OLED TV. Also, if you see, in case of OLED, our R&D, our product development teams, they are continuously working with industry leaders, those in the space of gaming. For example, NVIDIA, for example, AMD, Dolby, HGIG, all these groups, we are working very, very closely to ensure that we deliver the best gaming experience to all of them with the help of all these technology, NVIDIA G-Sync, Dolby Vision, which is the best HDR, one of the best HDR available in terms of sound, the state of art Dolby Atmos sound technology. So mix of all, we try and give the best gaming experience. And I would say that LG OLED TV is a delight for any gamer. Yeah.
So that's the news to all the studios who are developing games. But the next question is to JP. JP, I was reading something by the Riot Games, and they said they have a bunch of checklists, when they develop a game. So it's like how an user, if the user is moving from one level to another, how does the user experience that? If the user is stuck in a game, what is the experience of that? So do you guys also keep those checklists? And also, when you test a product, at every level, when you test the product, how do you test the product? One is that you're testing the product in terms of the game being played. One is you're testing the product in terms of experience. So how do you go about that? The same question to Vishnu. Vishnu, you said that certain games failed. So how do at what level do they fail, and how do you rectify the failure?
So yeah, Anushree, to answer that, I myself a Valorant player. So like developed by Riot Games. So what Riot does to maintain this user experience? So once the game is completed, because it's a game like CS:GO, or what Riot has developed, Valorant. So once the game is done, what they just put some checklists, like you should make some headshots, or you should make some this points. You should spike the plant 5 or 10 times. So these are the user experiences. If the user can fill this in a day or 2 days, the rank will be getting higher. There will be tiers like bronze, silver, and gold, where the progression will be happening, and they just put a lot of in-game assets like skins and all. They just update the battle passes every time for the new season. So that's how they kept the user experience good.
And you follow the same a similar model at
Yeah, yeah,
Bonbuki? Yeah.
definitely. We do follow the same model, and also there is a checklist where we see the fun elements are kept right, as well as the retention is good. If it's a free to play game, what will be the monetization in it? So these are the areas which we cover.
Thanks, JP. Vishnu, how many games have actually failed? I'm
Okay.
just curious about it.
Yeah, by the way, anyway, I did not mention that what are the failing games and etc. in this conversation. But still.
No, I just want to know.
So I don't want to talk about this, but yeah, of course, like it might, leave some negative impression on those studios. But I'll talk about, I'll generalize, my perspective is games is all about feedback, a reward, a journey. These 3 points basically. Okay, how let's say the player is playing, what is he getting? What is the rewards he's getting while playing it? How smooth his journey is, and how the feedback we offering to him that okay, let's say I hit a guy with my gun. Am I getting a feedback? Like okay, so having a good visual effects there, showing that hey boss, you hit this guy. Okay, like, you hit this enemy, and oh, this is how you project. Like okay, let's say there is some particle effects, which is like he's getting okay. I hit this guy. If you don't keep that such things, okay, I killed this guy. Okay, something programmatically we the calculations happening behind anyway. But the person he doesn't see anything visually, like visual feedback. So immediately user thinks, okay, this game sucks because I'm not getting anything. Like so that's why even in let's if I come back to my SGS, in the journey point of view, what I can we kept pretty interesting. Like we introduced a companion to our character. Like let's say it's a VR game anyway. So you keep running and you keep shooting all the guys, throughout the journey, throughout the experience, and then one small robot looks like a orb, which looks like a small, tiny globe, and he keeps following you right behind your shoulder, and he keeps talking to you all the journey throughout your game. He keeps talking to you. Hey boss, why are you going right? Go left. This is how you're supposed to go. And if he's not doing well, immediately he speaks about hey, like he literally he creep about you. You're not doing well. And he keeps helping all the time player to do what exactly supposed to be done. And at the same time, he himself opens, when I hit a pause button, immediately this guy comes in front of my face, in front of me, and opens the whole menu system. So he is helping all the menu system bringing the menu system in front of me. At the same time, he's constantly making me better to do the game, play better basically in the game. So that's how we brought the experience a little closer, user experience and the same time gameplay experience brought together one simple solution, which turned out really well and worked really well. People are talking about that. And yeah, a feedback journey and the reward system is these 3 are the key points according to me in order to make a good game.
Understood. Going back to Brain, you will be happy to know that I have a team member who's a keen player of Assassin's Creed, and I'll say that to him also. So when you develop the international, gaming studios, and you have mentioned a very particular point that India is yet not a very mature market, right? How do you ensure the same, a very seamless and good experience is carried on to mobile, because India is a heavy mobile gaming country, right, as of now?
Let me start by saying that, visual effects should not be seen by someone either playing a game or watching a movie or anything else. Because if you can see the visual effects, then the person creating the visual effects has failed. So we want people to believe that this is real. So success means that you're presenting something that's fake, but they cannot tell it's fake. So that's my first point. And no matter whether that's happening on a great monitor like the OLED TV from Abhiral, or whether it's happening on your mobile phone, you should not be able. The quality has to be much better, because the amount, you're going to be much more pixel perfect when you go on the large screen, and you can be a little bit less careful, in terms of resolution on a small screen. But back to, I just want to say that, let's take your point, okay, that now I'm going to develop a game for Abhiral. Okay, he talked of lots of technical things which are very difficult for people to understand, but very important because he's making it superlative. So if he was making a game about all the things he was doing, he will go to his brand motto. His brand motto, I think, something like "Life is great," right? Convenience, enjoyment. Customers should smile every day, kind of a story. And they had a theme when they relaunched their brand in 2013 called "It's All Possible." And so imagine that that's a perfect setup for a game. Abhiral, I'm pitching you. You have to come to me. Yeah. And you don't want to say OLED and tell all the technical specifications. You know what OLED stands for? Only love enhances development. I mean, imagine you can make something out of it, right? So you need to talk in the language of the consumer, right? Now, all games are about, you start with the idea. And we in India have a big problem. You know what our problem is? Ask any of your friends to tell you a story or write a story. We make it very complicated. We come from the epic, we come from Mahabharata and Ramayana, very long, complicated stories. But actually, when you want to make a great movie, a great piece of content, you need to be very simple. You have to simplify our minds. And the good designers, whether you're making a building, an architectural piece or whatever, or you're in a business plan or a startup company, by the way, go to any VC, they'll tell you, I can't understand your idea, bye-bye. So simplicity of the idea, making it a designer's dream. In the game world, you have to build controls into it, right? Because you have to navigate certain things. Some games are really bad at navigating, say, water. But you go to Call of Duty and you see the navigation is much easier. Okay? And that's what makes, you have to keep the excitement going. If anything interrupts your excitement, then that's a deal breaker. And then there are things, on the engagement side. So when we talk VFX, and the questions that you're asking are very important, but let me tell you, why are there so many different Oscar awards in a movie? Because it's not just the VFX Oscar winner that made the movie. It has to go with music, it has to go with background sound, it has to go with audio effects, it has to go with there are many things that come together to make something really happen.
Also the storytelling.
And that I call it ambience. So when you are looking at trying to make a person immersed into something, he's getting immersed in an ambience. When you walk into a restaurant, nowadays they decide what type of spray they should use, right? Because it should not be too offensive. If you use a normal spray, you'll run away saying that, okay, this is it, okay? Or there's mosquito coil smell, you'll run away. So the ambience is really important in a game to keep it going. And basically, I think JP and others also summarized it. It's the fun fact. He himself plays his game, right? But what is trial and error? Is he having fun? Is he or she who's playing the game having fun? Yes or no, right? And so if this was the LG game, are they having fun, and are they playing it for a long time, and are they actually getting indirectly the fact that this is a brand that wants them? I think it's a brand that stands for everyday life, right? I want a customer smile in everyday life. So that should mirror that kind of a story. By the way, we create about 80 to 90 commercials a month. We're the largest visual effects commercial house in the world. We work with all the big brands in the world. So we understand, we learn from brands, we learn from publishers, we learn, through these burning, and let's face it, this is not a perfect world. There are burning deadlines, there are huge bottlenecks, there is people who are redesigning stuff, and then if you do that in VFX, you have to start. It's very, very complicated. I don't want to take your time here. And so the process, I think, which everyone's summarizing for us on this panel is exactly the process. The process never changes. Discovery, production, testing, release, and a lot of things happen post-release. Lots of things happen post-release. There are many people in the world who actually have centers in India to manage the customers that are playing their game all over the world. That is a very, very large part of it. And they continuously release other things. In the movies, why do you have a Fast and Furious 7, 8, 9, 10? Why do you have so many? Because the franchise story is the main story. And a franchise is the perfect example of engagement, keeping a person, in that story for a very long time to come. So I think VFX is not about the technicalities, right? The VFX is very much about the experience. It's an experience here, an experience world, an experience business, and we're trying to make it as good as possible. If the experience of Zoom was as good as it should be, I would have been showing you stuff. But if I play something right now, it's likely to hang. So therefore, we are not doing that, right? So this is all about that experience, right?
Yeah, I agree. I'll come to Abiral here. Abiral, you said that you're working with a lot of gaming companies or service providers. How do you also ensure that you reach out to gamers? Because essentially, a lot of these games are played on such screens. So how do you continue to talk to the gaming community?
So Anushri, we have couple of things like we have co-marketing in India with NVIDIA. We also work with Xbox on certain campaigns, and we have our own brand stores where we do a in-store experience to the gamers coming there. So digitally, we work with NVIDIA and other brands to reach out to those target audience, and we create campaigns to attract, to talk to those consumers and engage with them.
Understand.
I can just add to one point Abiral made earlier.
Yes.
Abiral, the revenue from games, if you talked about entertainment and games in your earlier comment, the revenue from games in 2021 in India and forevermore that I can tell is larger than the Indian film industry already.
Oh, great. That's where somewhere I read, and thanks for clarifying it. It's really interesting.
And I know Vishnu didn't answer the question, but I want to know, in a year, your students develop how many games? Do they actually work with studios? And how many of them actually do not, there's also a failure setback on these games?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part of the question.
How many of those games actually do not make it to the market or they fail at a development stage?
Okay, our students, they do an internship with big studios. They work on various games, and definitely a studio like Ubisoft won't give us any of such numbers. It's completely secret under NDA. So it's not even that I don't want to say. I have no idea. I can really not reply to this question. Sorry.
And that's okay. That's okay. I'll take it from when Biren said, the real challenge comes out after a game is launched. So how do you tackle that based on feedback, and how quickly are you guys able to act? And I wouldn't say correction is not the right word, but upgrade or enhance any particular steps in the game. This is to both JP and Vishnu. Vishnu, you can go first, or JP. Either ways works.
Yeah, Anushree. So, like we have launched Auto Raja, which is our own IP game in MPL. So, after launching the game, like we have faced a lot of issues, like where there are few lag issues happening because of the networking, because it's a real-time multiplayer vehicular combat shooter. Uh, so for that, like we need to fix the servers should be in-house. The server should be maintained across the country, so there won't be any ping issues happening for the players and all. So we need to make the user experience even better, like making the colliders larger for the characters, for the passengers. So the core gameplay of Auto Raja is to pick the passengers in the city. At last, who has a maximum number of passengers will win the game.
Okay, understand. Vishnu?
Yeah, so like Mr. Bared mentioned rightly that releasing a game it's about my personal opinion. It's like I call it around 30-40%, and after that we evolve. Like we understand how users are taking our product, and then we keep on iterating that, and then we keep on releasing the sequels and the next versions and everything. So that's how like we improve our game based on the user, communities, and yeah, it's a constant exercise. Like, it's not that we release the game and we call it's done. It's a constant support that we need to give to the every user, and understand how they are experiencing it. So yeah, it's like never end process. That's how we do. We talk to the each and every community, and depends on if there are really genuine feedback. This is how it could have been done. Then we take it forward and do those kind of modifications. Of course, there will be internal testing team also. Generally, we make sure before product goes out, we make sure everything goes well. Based on the internal gaming QA team experiences. This is how we manage.
Yeah, Nishri. And also taking this Ludo King as an example, after they launch the game, they keep once the player is getting back again to the app, so they will be giving a reward like 100 coins or 200 coins. So just to maintain the retention for the players, and also based on the user demand, they just added the voice feature where a player can talk to other players while playing the game. So this is what different in games. And also talking about the game's user experience in mainstream UX and game UX. The mainstream UX, like, we just test the functionality, whether the feature is working right or not, whether the transaction happened successfully or not. But in game, it's not just clicking one button and you just win. It needs to be progression. It's not to be retention. Everything needs to be taken care.
Understood.
Can I
Yes,
just
please,
add
Viren.
to this
Yes,
point?
please.
Actually, you asked a very important question. It depends on data and depends what you're talking about as failure rate. So, for example, when you are coming up with concepts and testing those concepts and making something out of them, either in art or one level, and testing a one-level game, that is a willful process of trying to choose between ideas. It's like making drafts when you're writing a script, right? So in the game part, in the discovery part, if you keep creating concepts and don't go ahead with them, even if you spend some money, ultimately that is your R&D cost that you will add to the next big game, and you'll recover it, right? So in fact, that is what we do not do in the content industry in India. We do not have that concept of short films, for example. We are out of the world's largest creator of long form films, but we are the world's smallest number of short films are created in this story. So I think when you ask this question of Jan and what he was doing, students should be encouraged to create short form tests and concepts and ideas, which are never meant to become a big game. I mean, they one in 100 might. So even if you go to look at data from places like Kickstarter and other places, you will find that even the final games, they have a success rate of around 13, 14, 15%, right? So that's a good success rate. And it shows that people 1 in 10 will make money, but the rest of them may not lose. They may recover some money, they may get their investment back. But success rate is a very difficult thing to tell in any content industry, because many things have to come together to do that, right? But I will also just add to that one point in saying that the success rate is differently looked at in the discovery process. Success rate is looked at differently in the testing process, and success rate is looked at different when users are playing it and finding issues with it. So it depends how you want to define success. And I just wanted to make that point, that it's at multiple points that you look at success.
No, I agree. That actually your question is what I'm going to take to Yen, asking. They have campuses in India also, and I wanted to know, in India, how do you train these students, to become the next gen developers? How is the training different from more mature countries? Or what are the focus areas?
We train our students, first of all, with the basics. The first year, actually, they don't even touch a computer. We train them to all the foundation that they need, obviously in art, but also in gaming. They start with what we call the non-digital game mechanics. What makes a board game, for example, or chess or card game so exciting? Once they understand these mechanics, it's exactly the same system that is used in a video game. The system of reward, the the frustration that you have to balance with the boredness, etc. All of that is coming from traditional games. So once they understand that, they can move to the video games, use everything, all the tools that are at their disposal, like VFX, for example, and not the opposite. We don't want the students to come and see, okay, in Unity, I have this fantastic ball of fire. What can I do with that? How can I make a game with that? And honestly, it's a bit caricatural, but there are so many games that are made like that. They are just using the assets that are available and trying to make a story or game or whatever. And the games are a failure. They are. They can only be a failure. It should be the opposite. You have to think very broad. Okay, I have this fantastic story to tell. I have these game mechanics that I want in my game. Now, what are the techniques available to make that possible? Sometimes the techniques are not even invented yet, and sometimes the games, it happens in the history of gaming, some games were invented too early. And we had to wait maybe 20 years for the technology to come into place for the games to be possible. That happens. This is exactly how we want them to think about their games.
Understandable. So I have two last questions, one to Abhiral and one to Viren. Abhiral, what's the message for the new set of gamers who are making the transition from mobile to serious gameplay?
Yeah, Anushi. So those players, looking at the console gamers, if you see the kind of experience that televisions are giving, which is equally good, and you have very immersive experience when it comes to picture quality and sound, and the action, the real action which is happening because of the fast response time and all those things. So this is something which we are also creating an experience zones at our stores and trying to communicate to consumers. So I am sure definitely with this there will be a good expansion of consumers coming and playing those games on larger screen, on bigger screens like OLED television and these kind of products.
Viren, the very last question is, what are the games that we should await from Technicolor, and how interesting are these going to be?
We typically work with the big publishers on somewhere between 8 and 12 games in a year. We, being a service provider, prefer for them to make their announcements. If you follow our company social media or mine, you will see us constantly posting the first look or the trailer as it comes out. We'll be very careful actually, because we have a team here of between 600 and 800 artists who constantly work on games every day for many years now. And I think what Jan said was very important in terms of how they should start. But also artists are hungry to grow and learn new things.
Absolutely.
So what makes really good quality is very technical things inside that. I mean, even the artists have, and tools make it simpler for them. So if they understand what they want to do, things like, creating the right rigs, right? It's very complex. If you need to do something where there is a bird and there are feathers and, there's a body structure and stuff like that, they have to understand the basics, which is art and anatomy, etc. But they also have to use tools to make this happen. And if you look at what really makes and enhances the quality of a game, and even today, mobiles are getting really, really good, right? If mobiles weren't so good, you couldn't have strapped them in and made it into a VR set. I mean, the screen has made that happen. And I think basically there are subtle things, sometimes subtle things. Like if an animal jumps from a wall down onto the ground, there has to be a little subtle dust, So this subtle smoke, the subtle dust, complex hairstyles, wind, breeze, these add to the whole thing. And yeah, the tools are there. There will be, somebody will say, I use Houdini, someone uses Nuke, someone uses Shave and Haircut. There are more tools than you can possibly even learn. And luckily, they don't come with the manual that Jan first saw. They are fairly intuitive now, and they're becoming more and more intuitive for everyone. But I think, there was a point which was made by Jan earlier, and he talked about a ball of fire. I remember when VFX first came out, I met a young movie maker, and he came from, the part of the country where I live in, and he showed me a fantastic shot where he was throwing a knife at somebody, right? And the knife went forward 3 times, backward twice, and then went into that guy. And he said, "See my VFX." And I said, "Listen, no knife in the world goes this way, and no one's going." so, so we got to be careful, right? We got to be careful about the fact, and I come back to this point that we have to make people believe it's real. If they believe it's real, if they believe this is the world they want, they will go for it, and your chances of making a hit game with all the other stuff that goes into it is much, much greater. So I believe that it is art from the heart that will win the game, win the game anytime.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was a pleasure to have you out.
Thank you, Anushree.
Thank you, Anushree. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Good to meet everyone on the panel. And Aviral, let's talk about gaming.
Sure.
Likewise, Byron.
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was nice.
Bye. Yeah. Bye.
Thank you, everybody, for that insightful session. Up next, we are moving on now to our last session of the day, titled Diversity in Gaming. For this, I would like to call 𝗚𝗺𝗺𝗺, editor, New Media, Indian Express Online, to introduce our new speaker.
Over the past couple of days, you've had and heard a lot of conversations about gaming and how the gaming industry in India is shaping up. But there is one more conversation that's very important, and that is the conversation about the future of gaming in India and across the world, and how it is becoming more inclusive and bringing in more voices and more people into its fold. And one important aspect of this is how women are becoming an important part of gaming across the world. And who better to speak about this than 𝗚𝗚𝗺𝗶𝗶. If you ask Leslie to introduce herself, she will tell you she is your best friend at AMD. And literally, her business card carries the same thing. She has a philosophy which has carried her through 18 years in the gaming industry. And that is to treat everyone with respect and kindness. In her functional role at AMD as the Senior Developer Relations Manager, Leslie is responsible for AMD's Gaming Influencer Program. Based out of California, she's a super active gamer and, more importantly, strong advocate of diversity and inclusion in gaming. She's almost an evangelist when it comes to bringing more women into gaming, and not just as gamers, but as people who handle the business and take the segment ahead. We're happy to have Leslie join us today to share her perspectives on why inclusion and diversity is quintessential for the growth of the gaming industry.
Hi, I'm Leslie Peritano. I am your best friend at AMD, and I'm here to talk about diversity in the video game industry. And it's a topic that I'm so passionate about that I was on a little trip and I took a break so that I could come and talk with you today. So thank you so much for having me. Now, I started my career in high tech 30 years ago, the last 17 of which have been in the video game industry. So when I started, I was often the only woman in the room, so to speak, or one of few women at events, that kind of thing. And certainly we didn't consider ourselves video gamers as part of the industry. And being the only woman in the room, it's like the people around me also weren't very diverse. It was mostly white males, everywhere that I went, whether in the workplace or at events, et cetera. So there was a very stereotypical thought about who a video gamer was, and I wasn't it. So, as time had gone on in the industry, I'd spent a while, being the only woman in the room, so to speak, and I've certainly experienced, discrimination and harassment in different aspects of what I was doing in my career. And as it was progressing, I started seeing other women, at events and in the industry, and kind of seeing that maybe there were women playing video games. And I remember the moment where I realized that I myself am a gamer. And that moment was, so part of my job was, telling the technology story and, to consumers, right, of video games and the different developer partnerships that we had going. And I did that through video game capture. But I would bring in our resident gamer to take the footage, to play the game and capture the footage of to create those videos. But what I would do is I would play the game first so that I knew what I wanted in the video and where the best areas were to capture and things like that. So I would sit the gamer down, the male gamer, and I'd say, okay, this is what we need to do. I need you to go over here and do that, and et cetera, et cetera. And I remember the game, the first game was that I felt I was a gamer of, and I play games, but this is my realization, was Just Cause by Square Enix and Avalanche. And the gamer, the gentleman, was sitting playing the game, and I'd be like, no, you have to, shoot here, go over the bridge, blow those things up, and then go off that way, right? And he just wasn't getting it right. So I said, okay, let me show you. I sat down, I went and I shot, and I blew things up, and I ran over there, and I did all the things, right? And when I was done, the person who was managing the capture aspect of it on the production team said, hey, we got it. That was it. That was perfect. And it was that moment that I was like, oh, I can do this. I can play the games. I play games. I'm a gamer. And so then from then on out, I did all the video capture myself. And then as I was seeing more and more women at events and talking with them, I realized, we're all kind of coming to be as gamers, right? And we all had different stories of harassment and or discrimination that had happened. And I realized we needed support. And it's not, like when I look back at it, like we were growing and who knows how many women were gamers, percentage wise, 15 or 20 years ago or whatever. But whatever research would have been done, if any, my guess is there were more of us because we probably just weren't visible. We're probably like me, playing video games, but not thinking of ourselves as gamers because we didn't see ourselves anywhere. Up until a couple of years ago, less than 5% of video games had female protagonists in them, right? So, and it wasn't until last year that that number tripled. It's like 18% of video games had female protagonists, right? So we didn't see ourselves, and we didn't see ourselves in marketing. We didn't see ourselves anywhere. And then when we did say something, we did say we were a gamer at the time, we would see harassment and discrimination and things like that. So I started creating groups, where we would talk and support each other and things like that. And then I started working with an industry group where different developers and publishers and hardware companies, et cetera, would come together to talk about how do we support, how do we improve the video game industry. But it wasn't just for women, it was for diversity in general, right? Like how do we get representation for women, but also people of color and LGBT and just diverse people in general. And as I was going through that process of trying to find support, that AMD started to recruit me. And this is 6 years ago. And there were two very important things that had happened in that recruitment process. One is, I was shown products that I can believe in. So I have to have that, right? I have to believe in the company that I work for. But what pushed me over the edge and made me decide to come here was that I got a call from our, senior executive vice president that said, I hear that we're hiring you to do this stuff with content and developers and things like that, but also that you're a proponent of supporting women and people of color and LGBT and diverse people in general in the video game and technology industries. And then the exact words being, come to AMD and help us grow and change as a company. And those were words I couldn't say no to. And those are things that I challenge other companies to also to do, right? To grow and change as companies and supporting diverse people. And so I couldn't say no, so I came to AMD, and here I am, right? And my role over the last several years has changed to where now I'm really following my passion and working with influencers to provide representation for diverse groups of people. And in fact, the influencers that I work with, it's a fairly large group of people. 90% represent diversity in one way or another. So it's really a fantastic group of people where we're, it's our way of bringing representation to the industry. And we know things now like, 41% of gamers are women, are female. And 70% of gamers are 18 and older, right? So there's a big market there. There are 2.5 billion gamers around the world. 41% being women, that's pretty huge. And then we also know in the India market that, globally 1 out of 10 gamers are Indian. And within India, you've got 18% who are women. So that is also a growing number. And as time goes on, these diverse numbers grow. We haven't quite seen that representation in games, but we're starting to see it. As I mentioned, in the last year, 18% of games had female protagonists, which is huge compared to where we were even just the year before. And that representation is incredibly important. And if you think about it, like, so for me, from my perspective, I realized I was a gamer when Just Cause 2, when I was in that moment in Just Cause 2. But I really started to love certain IPs, and want to go back, and I really just enjoyed them because I was able to play a character that was more like myself. I was able to play female characters. The first one that I remember, that my favorite IP of all time is the Borderlands IP. That was the first game that I felt that I could just kick butt as a woman as a female character throughout the game. And that has actually continued on throughout the franchise to where those characters have become more and more diverse. And so in Borderlands 3, the main character that I play is Amara, and she is actually an Indian female character, which is awesome. And so when you look at the diversity of characters out there, we're starting to see women. There's a few LGBT characters here and there. There's becoming more people of color. There's still a long ways to go. And so having played Borderlands, Assassin's Creed, Mass Effect, Horizon Zero Dawn, like, these are all games where I can play a character that I can relate to. And what I find is that brings me into the game even more. That I'm having such a good time that when I'm done, I want to play it again. I want to keep playing. I want the DLC, whatever it is with the specific franchise. And if you think about it, on the video games that you're playing, are you playing characters that are like you? And how does that feel? And if they're not like you, how does that feel? When you can play characters that are like yourself, it brings you in. And then beyond that, in the marketing, when you see people who are gamers who are like you, right? When I see other women represented in ads or LGBT, etc., right? I'm more drawn into that because I see myself, and that's kind of where my passion then has come from. Just kind of the desire, not just to see myself, but to also help others see themselves. And a very specific reason for that is that in my career and in my life, as a woman and part of the LGBT community, when I've seen change, it's because yes, my group as the minority are speaking up and saying, hey, we need change. It's also because there are allies out there. The change wouldn't happen if you don't have those allies out there, because as a minority, we are a minority, right? And it's the allies that help you bring you to that finish line so that you can have change. And it's kind of in looking back at all that change where I realized that, yes, self-advocate, but also be an ally and help bring change for other people, help bring change to my community, help bring change to other communities. And I think that's critically important because that is how we see positive change happen in our industry and outside of our industry. So my challenge to you, is to reflect on this event that you've been at. Hopefully you've gained a lot of information and you've got a lot of insight, you're excited, and all of that. It's been a great event, and also then think about, if you are part of a minority, how to self-advocate, but also to look outside of you at other diverse groups and think about how to advocate and be an ally to them, in your company. Is it bringing in diverse representation in your marketing efforts? If you're a video game company, is it bringing that diverse representation into video games? And a little caution there is to bring in that diverse representation, make sure you get the feedback of that diverse organization or that diverse group of people. And the same thing in your marketing, always get that feedback. When you're an ally, work with those groups of whom you are an ally to. And so that is my challenge to you. Work to be an ally as well as self-advocate, and together, our industry will just keep growing and changing and being a better place for women and diverse people in general. And with that, I hope you've enjoyed the event and you've enjoyed our conversation today. Feel free to find me online at Love Laugh Leslie, or look me up at 𝗚𝗺𝗶𝗁 and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And with this, we now come to the end of the second edition of India Gaming Summit. A big thank you to all our viewers for being a loyal audience. It was an absolute pleasure to have you all attend the conference. Before we go, we would like to thank our presenting partner, MPL, our co-presenting partners, WD Black, LG OLED, and Google Play, our knowledge partner, 𝗚𝗺, as well as our industry partner, AIGF, and our associate partner, ZUPI. Thank you, everybody, and see you next year.